While he was still unconscious, Masaru heard someone trying to wake him up. When he opened his eyes, he was shocked to see that the person in front of him had bunny ears. Startled, he reached out and touched them, realizing they were warm and fluffy. This wasn't a dream. The girl felt embarrassed and quickly pulled her ears back, asking what he thought he was doing. Masaru immediately apologized and asked why she was wearing those ears. The girl replied that they weren't accessories. She was from the rabbit race. Surprised, Masaru quickly sat up. The girl looked at him in confusion and asked if he understood what she had said. Masaru felt as if he was truly awake, realizing this was no dream, but an actual reincarnation. He had really been reborn in the world of Alstacia. Then panic hit him as he began to wonder how he had ended up there and started worrying about basic things: food, shelter, and even a toilet. Starting from zero in a completely new world suddenly felt overwhelmingly difficult. Just then, Masaru looked at the girl and asked if she could take him with her. She hesitated, explaining that she didn't know who he was, and if she brought a human back with her, everyone would be angry. She revealed that humans deeply hated non-humans and that the village elders were especially unkind. Masaru thought it sounded just like something out of a manga or a game, and he wondered if slavery existed in this world too, where humans treated other races cruelly. He then asked her if she could at least try talking to them on his behalf. Suddenly, a strange noise echoed nearby. Masaru mentioned that it sounded like someone was coming to greet them, but the girl couldn't see anyone. Out of nowhere, a hobgoblin appeared, making her scream in fear. She panicked, wondering why it was there, and said that they wouldn't be able to defeat it without help from adults. As the creature approached, Masaru noticed its body was covered in scars and began to wonder just how dangerous it was. The girl warned him that it was extremely strong and could have strayed from its group. She urged him to hurry and run away with her. But Masaru pushed her back and told her to run, while he kept the hobgoblin's attention. She hesitated, not wanting to leave him alone. But Masaru told her firmly that if the monster was really that dangerous, she couldn't risk leading it back to her village where her friends and family lived. When she still wouldn't move, Masaru shouted for her to go. As she finally ran off, he thought to himself that he didn't really know what he was doing. But after seeing the look on her face, there was no way he could just stand still. Masaru jumped forward, thinking how great it would be if he had some kind of skill he could use at a time like this. Then, in desperation, he grabbed a water bottle and threw it at the hobgoblin. It didn't seem to have any effect, and the creature began to laugh as it moved closer to him. But suddenly, its foot slipped on the bottle, causing it to lose balance, crash into a nearby rock, and fall defeated. Right then, a glowing portal opened behind Masaru. From within, a voice scolded him, asking if he was planning to preserve the accident site. Before he could respond, a sharp slap landed on his hand, and a woman's voice angrily demanded to know what he thought he was doing. She complained that she had gone through great trouble to summon him near a human settlement, not in some remote area, and yet he had somehow ended up far away and almost got himself killed by a goblin. Masaru was shocked when he realized the woman was the goddess Victinias. She looked equally surprised, wondering how he was still alive and asking why he thought she had given him skills in the first place. The scene brought back memories of his reincarnation. Back then, when he had been confused by her words, Victinias had told him not to worry and that she would explain everything. She revealed that a certain god from Earth had lost a bet with her, and as part of the deal, the price was Masaru's reincarnation into the world she managed. To confirm his identity, she reminded him that he had been 36 years old at the time of reincarnation, but his current body was in its 20s. He had worked at a home center, and his hobbies had been playing games. As she began to mention something about his status, Masaru, still overwhelmed, interrupted her and asked her to wait. He wondered what was even happening to him, and if all of this was just a dream. But Victinias told him firmly that it was reality, and he had no right to refuse it. Then, using her divine power, she conjured 3 shining cards before him, explaining that she would grant him her blessings. Each card contained a special skill, and all 3 were to be given to him. Masaru glanced at the cards and commented that when she mentioned blessings, he had imagined something like a legendary weapon or powerful magic. Victinias replied that since his hobby was gaming, he should already understand what skills were. Masaru then asked if he could actually obtain the skills by using the cards, and she nodded, saying they should proceed right away. Just then, another woman appeared, Hera, mentioning something about 8 tickets, which made Victinias freeze in shock. Hera told her that she had made a serious mistake. Victinias tried to avoid her gaze, saying she hadn't seen her for a while because she needed to speak with her father. Masaru, feeling uneasy, simply nodded and kept quiet. After a short while, Hera apologized to Masaru, saying that the ones truly responsible for this blunder should be the ones to say sorry. She introduced herself as Hera and explained that her husband Zeus and the idiot Victinias were both sorry for the inconvenience they had caused him. Masaru was stunned to hear those names. Zeus and Hera? The same ones from Greek mythology? Hera confirmed it calmly and explained that, according to the divine contract, Masaru was originally supposed to receive proper help upon reincarnation, a blessing that would assist him, including the ability to understand the language of the new world. However, once a soul was sent out into another realm, even the gods couldn't intervene directly. She added that Victinius had tried to take a portion of the blessing tickets she had won from a bet with Hera's husband. Out of the 8 tickets she received, Victinius had intended to give Masaru only 3. Masaru was speechless upon hearing that, while Victinius closed her eyes with tears in them, muttering that she couldn't hear any of it. Then, a glowing slot machine appeared before them. Victinius explained that although she could grant Masaru skills, that didn't mean she would handpick them. This was the common divine method. Hera then said that if Masaru used 10 tickets at once, he would receive a special bonus. Hera offered to give him 1 extra ticket to make up for her husband's mistake, and Victinius, still embarrassed, agreed to give another one as an apology. That made a total of 10 tickets for Masaru. Hera added that being allowed to roll for 11 skills was an extraordinary privilege, and that Masaru should be honored and express his sincere gratitude. Masaru agreed respectfully and activated the divine slot machine to roll for his 11 skills, while Victinius, still teary-eyed, quietly wondered what kind of abilities he would end up receiving. As Masaru received the skills Appraisal Levier 3 and Masonry Levier 4, Hera commented that he was doing quite well so far. She said she had checked his data and that his luck was surprisingly good. The process continued, granting him Dismantling Levier 2, Mining Levier 3, and Leatherworking Levier 3. Victinius noticed how quiet he had become, and Hera explained that Masaru had been a skilled carpenter who worked with both wood and stone in his previous life. The next skills he gained were item box, blacksmithing, crafting, healing magic, and logging. Both goddesses stared in disbelief, saying his luck almost made them want to cry, because every skill he'd obtained was at a low level. Masaru also received a map ability, leaving Victinius speechless. Hera tried to lighten the mood, saying those were still great for someone with carpentry experience. Masaru, however, couldn't help wondering why both of them were suddenly sweating nervously. They quickly said that the granting ceremony was complete and that it was time to send him down to the new world. The scene shifted back to the present, where Victinius pointed a finger at Masaru's nose, scolding him for not listening. She explained that the blessing tickets were made using divine power and were extremely rare, usually only created when a god and a human had a child. Yet Masaru had received 10 of them, so if he died after all that, she would never forgive him. Masaru replied that she didn't understand his situation. He had no choice but to fight. Victinius told him firmly that she meant he should act more carefully. She demanded to know what he was thinking when he said things like, "Preserve the accident site," reminding him that this wasn't Earth. If he didn't kill his enemies, they would kill him first. If he wanted to survive, he would have to gather his courage and fight without hesitation. She then handed him the goblin's weapon and told him to use it. Masaru nodded, saying they should see how it worked. Victinius told him that all he needed to do was think about his status. Masaru told her not to rush him and focused his mind to check his stats. As he did, Victinius asked if he finally understood that this was a world where people grew stronger by gaining experience points. She told him to just assume that the goblin incident had been a good lesson for him and that she would now transfer him to the nearest village. Masaru quickly asked her to wait, explaining that he had met a girl there who would probably come back looking for him. Victinius was surprised and said that there shouldn't have been any humans around that area. Masaru clarified that the girl he met wasn't human. She had bunny ears and was from the rabbit race. Victinius was startled and insisted that she had to send him to a human village instead. Just then, someone poked her from behind. Annoyed, Victinius shouted that she was busy, but when she turned around, she froze. It was Hera. Victinius immediately became nervous and told Hera that they shouldn't interfere right now. Hera calmly took her by the arm and asked if she wanted to say something more. Victinius quickly said that Masaru was in a different world now and should just live freely before being pulled away. Moments later, members of the rabbit race appeared, and the girl from before ran up to Masaru, hugging him tightly. Relieved to see he was safe, she smiled, while Masaru said he had somehow managed to make it out alive. Some of the female guards accompanying her thanked him for saving Mei. They asked about the stray goblin, wondering if it had escaped. Masaru shook his head and pointed toward a nearby spot where the creature lay defeated. They were astonished and asked how he had managed to take down a hobgoblin on his own. Masaru quickly denied doing anything impressive, explaining that he had just dodged its attack, and the goblin had tripped and hit its head on a rock by itself. The group was left speechless, unsure whether to believe him or not. Feeling awkward, Masaru asked if he could stay and live in their village. One of the guards said they could talk about it on the way, while another agreed, saying that since he was in trouble, they would gladly welcome him. Hearing that, Masaru felt a wave of relief and happiness. They mentioned that Masaru had risked his life to save Mei from the hobgoblin, and they were deeply grateful for it. They invited him to come along so he could meet their village chief. Masaru agreed and turned to Mei, thanking her. She smiled and pointed out that he hadn't told her his name yet. Formally introducing herself as Mei, she waited for his response. Her polite manner made Masaru a little curious, and when she noticed his expression, she asked if something was wrong. He shook his head and said he was fine. Then, with a small smile, he introduced himself as Narumi Masaru, asking her to just call him Masaru. As they shook hands, Masaru thought about how uncertain the road ahead was. He had no idea what awaited him in this new world, but his new life, one where he could live freely, had just begun. Masaru recalled his past. He had been a 36-year-old man traveling from his home in the countryside, but on his way back, he had been summoned by a goddess. Regardless of the circumstances, she had been the one who decided everything for him, and his life in that new world had already been set in stone. He had no knowledge of that world, but upon his arrival, he had received 11 skills. However, none of them were offensive, which made the situation chaotic. When he had first been summoned, he had immediately been attacked by a goblin, though he had somehow managed to survive. While walking with Mei and her people, he and the group had reached the entrance of the rabbit village, guided by Masaru's map skill. Mei had mentioned that it was their home. When Masaru entered, he had noticed the villagers looking at him with curiosity. A guard had informed him that the population was around 100. Mei had added that everyone in the village helped one another to live their lives, and she had told him that he could think of them as his family. Masaru had thanked her and observed that the terraces of the houses were tied together with ropes. The homes themselves were merely tents, and shafts had been placed to support them. To him, it had resembled the Yayoi era in Japan. He had asked if it was a new settlement, and the guard had replied that they had only been living there for about 2 years. From that, Masaru had understood that they were struggling a great deal. Another person had asked if it would be fine for him to meet the chief immediately, and Masaru had agreed. When he had arrived at the chief's house, the chief had said he hadn't believed the rumors to be true, but seeing Masaru had proved them right. Masaru had politely said that the chief could let him know if there was anything he could help with. The villagers had thanked him for saving them, but Masaru had replied that it wasn't necessary, explaining that if he had been left alone, he would have gotten lost. The chief had told him not to worry about it, as he had risked his life to save Mei. He had expressed his gratitude and welcomed Masaru to their village. Though he admitted it was a bit sudden, he had also told Masaru to live in the same house as Mei. Masaru had hesitated, but the chief had explained that Mei's father had been killed by a monster when she was very young, and that she now lived with her mother, who needed some help. Masaru had thought it was fine, but had wondered if Mei, being at that age, might not like it. However, when he had looked at her, she had smiled and said that if he was fine with it, she had no problem. Masaru had gently patted her head and thanked her for her kind attitude. The chief told Masaru that they could talk about other matters the next day and asked him to go and get some rest. Masaru apologized, saying he would do anything in return if he could be of help. The chief told him not to worry and to just do whatever he could at his own pace. As Masaru left, he kept thinking about everything that had happened. Then he remembered one of his skills and realized there was something he could do. He told the chief that if it was acceptable, he could help improve the entire village, and he was confident about it. Both the chief and the others were confused, so Masaru explained that he could enhance all the systems in the village and play a role in its development. The chief stopped him, saying he didn't think Masaru was simply speaking out of ambition, but if someone new suddenly declared they wanted to rebuild the place, it might cause unnecessary panic. He asked if Masaru understood what he meant. Masaru agreed, though he admitted he wasn't the best at reading the atmosphere. Still, he believed it would be better to ensure a safer life for everyone. He knew that even though he had noticed certain dangers earlier, he hadn't acted quickly enough, which had put the children and the elderly at risk. So he mentioned that it should be possible to create a safe and stable life in the village, and he wanted to do whatever he could. He thought that if he left things as they were, he would only regret it later, and he wanted to become someone helpful to everyone. He recalled how he had often been scolded at work, but those experiences had taught him to recognize when he was doing something wrong. Although he didn't fully understand what he was capable of, he wanted to do his best for the sake of the village. That was why he requested the chief's permission. He believed that even if his efforts caused frustration or resistance, acting from genuine intention would eventually make a difference. The chief understood that Masaru was recalling his experiences from working at his home center in the countryside and felt hopeful after hearing him. He then asked what Masaru planned to do first. Masaru replied that he would begin immediately. The chief thought it should be fine and saw in Masaru's eyes a clear determination about what he truly wanted. Masaru agreed and said he only wished to do what would be best for the village and would do his utmost. After that, He thanked the chief and left. Masaru was in the forest, gathering resources while thinking that he first needed to check what his skills actually were. He recalled that when he had received his skills from the slot machine, the types of things he could create had changed, and there were also some skills he didn't remember obtaining. He decided to start by identifying which skills he originally had and which ones he could now test. Using the appraisal skill, he examined the simple knife in his hand and found it impressive. Since he had borrowed it from May, he decided to be careful not to break it. He understood that these skills were extremely useful, as they required no prior training, experience, or knowledge. He then checked his cutting skill and decided to test it by touching a nearby tree. In an instant, the tree was cut down and began to fall toward him, but he quickly dodged it, thinking how dangerous it had been and that he had almost died. He noticed that out of his 213 MP, about 1/6 had been consumed by using the skill. Still, it didn't seem too complicated, and he only needed to raise his level to use it more efficiently. Next, he tried out his building skill and realized he could manipulate stone without using any tools. To start, he decided to form a simple cube. When he lifted a small rock, it transformed into a perfect cube, just as he had imagined. Then he thought of drying the tree he had cut earlier. After checking the details, he learned that if the material was of the same level, he could easily compare the effectiveness of different skills. He wanted to use the wood later as a building material, but he knew that if the tree was left alone for a while, it would lose all its moisture and become troublesome to work with. Normally, it would take half a year, or even a full year for wood to dry naturally, sometimes 2 or 3 years depending on the type of tree, though a few might dry within 1 or 2 months. He wondered if his skill could speed up that process and dry the wood instantly. As Masaru was about to test his skill, Mei arrived and told him that dinner was ready, which was why she had come to get him. Masaru collapsed onto a piece of the fallen tree and told her not to worry, assuring her that he seemed fine. Mei, however, was shocked and said that he looked even worse than when he had fought the goblin. She asked what he had been doing to end up like that. Masaru soon realized that what he was experiencing was mana depletion, something he had often read about in books. Using such a powerful skill had clearly drained him, though he was relieved that he had managed to dry the log without overstraining himself. As he looked at the log in satisfaction, Mei grabbed his arm and urged him to return home. Masaru felt deeply embarrassed about his condition as they walked back together. When they arrived, Mei's mother welcomed them warmly. Masaru greeted her politely and introduced himself. She introduced herself as Ruru and asked him not to be so formal. Mei proudly told her mother that Masaru was incredible and had even saved her life by defeating a hobgoblin. Ruru told Masaru that although they didn't have much, their home at least provided shelter from the rain and wind. She asked him to think of it as his own house and to make himself comfortable. Masaru agreed with gratitude, and they sat down to eat. As he ate, he thought that it was thanks to the rabbit people that he was able to live in their world, and that he would begin a new life there. In truth, he had no clear idea how much he could do for them, but he was determined to give his best. He decided that starting the next day, he would begin executing the village improvement plan. The next day, the construction resumed. After much thought, Masaru went to the entrance of the village, where the guard asked if everything was fine. Masaru agreed and said the first priority would be to reinforce the fence. One of the workers mentioned that he had heard most of Masaru's plans from the chief, and that Masaru intended to make several improvements to the area. Another worker, who had been excited ever since waking up, asked curiously why Masaru was starting with the fence. Masaru replied that safety should come first, so even if monsters attacked, the village would not suffer serious damage. From the roots of the wood to the ground beneath, he wanted to build a stone guard. He explained that they could use as much stone from the nearby cliff as they needed, and that building the fence with it would make it much stronger. Everyone became excited upon hearing this. One of them interrupted, pointing out that the fence did not go all the way around the village, and that they would need a massive amount of stone, which they simply didn't have enough manpower to gather. Masaru told him not to worry, explaining that he had already gone to the cliff with Mei earlier that morning to collect materials. He then used his item box to take out a large amount of stone, leaving everyone stunned. Masaru assured them that there would be no problem. Everyone was shocked by his use of the item box skill, even though it was supposedly common and at least one person in each town usually possessed it. Another worker commented that Masaru probably had his own reasons for doing things that way. Masaru, slightly disappointed, wondered what they were talking about and whether the skill was truly that unusual. It hadn't seemed rare when he first obtained it. He decided it might be better not to show that ability too often. He then instructed them to move the stones toward the construction site. As they began lifting them, Masaru asked them to stop, warning that placing them randomly would cause the structure to crumble. When they wondered whether there was a specific way to position the stones, Masaru decided to experiment. After noticing that they had many smaller stones, he built a small sample wall, explaining that even a minor attack could break it if built like that. The important part, he said, was what lay behind the stones. He explained that the stones weren't smaller by accident and that the gaps between them were deliberate. By aligning the gaps evenly while stacking, the wall would become sturdier and less likely to collapse. Someone asked if simply piling them up wouldn't work. Another inquired if there was anything else they needed to do. Masaru replied that if the attacks became stronger, they would need to use pebbles as well. He explained that placing large stones on the outside and filling the inside with pebbles would allow rainwater to pass through easily, keeping the wall strong even during rainfall. That, he said, was why using pebbles was a good idea. It was a basic but effective technique that would make the wall stronger. Finally, he told everyone to make sure there were no gaps left between the stones. Masaru decided to teach everyone the proper way to build a strong wall, and mentioned that he would be counting on their help from then on. A few women approached and, after excusing themselves, asked how he managed to come up with such wonderful ideas out of nowhere. Masaru replied that he didn't mind sharing since everyone was contributing, and he explained that he had mostly been gathering materials to help them with cooking. He mentioned that he had heard they used only fire for cooking, which was why he was planning to build a furnace to make things easier. Hearing this, their expressions suddenly changed, and they asked if he intended to build it immediately after making the area safer. Masaru thought to himself that it sounded more like an order, and that these women were truly the demons of the kitchen. Realizing he shouldn't get on their bad side, he quickly clarified that he would be using stones to build the furnace, so there shouldn't be any problem. They became delighted upon hearing this, understanding that Masaru truly knew how difficult cooking could be. Together with the women, Masaru went to the field and said he would be building the furnace. He was doing most of the heavy lifting, but asked if he could count on their help and whether it was fine with them. They agreed enthusiastically, telling him to leave it to them. Masaru explained that he would need several more materials and would appreciate their help in gathering them. When they asked what to collect besides stones, he mentioned clay, grass, and sand, explaining that these materials would strengthen the structure and make the work easier than using only stones. One of the women said she understood how clay would help, but wondered why they needed grass and sand as well. Masaru replied that they would be mixing them into the clay, since clay alone was not very strong and had a weak structure. However, when combined with grass and sand, it would form a more solid mixture that would become much stronger once hardened. As some of the women still looked unsure, Masaru asked Mei to accompany a few of them and told everyone not to hesitate to ask questions. He assured them that if there was anything he could help with, he certainly would. Soon after, one of the women mentioned that it would be nice to have forks and spoons for the entire rabbit village, along with some tables and chairs. Masaru considered the request and, though a bit concerned about the mana it would require, decided he could manage it with his skills. He agreed, telling them that it would take a few days, but he would definitely make it happen. He then thought it would be nice to build a roofed area where everyone could occasionally gather to share meals together. When he noticed the women looking at him, he wondered if something was wrong. They shook their heads, and one of them remarked that Masaru really knew a lot and had incredible building skills, which impressed everyone. Masaru replied that they were simply things he remembered from his previous work. Curious, they asked what kind of work he used to do. Masaru answered that it was just ordinary labor. He had worked as a regular employee at a countryside home center. Finally, he told them that since they were going to make many things together, he would need everyone's help as much as possible. Masaru then joined in to help lift the stones, and everyone worked according to his instructions. He even crafted some bows, forks, and spoons for everyone. As the day went on and night fell, they continued working until late. While eating dinner, Masaru used chopsticks, and Mei, along with the others, watched him curiously, intrigued by the unfamiliar utensils. The next day, the work continued steadily. Over time, Masaru finally completed the stone-backed wooden fence and was overjoyed to see the result. Everyone cheered proudly, celebrating what they had accomplished with their own hands. By dinner time, the gathering area was fully set up with tables, chairs, and proper utensils. One of the women approached Masaru and said that the furnace was incredibly sturdy and extremely useful, and that the roofed gathering area looked wonderful. Masaru smiled and said he was truly happy to see everyone doing well. He noticed that most of them were using the chopsticks he had made and thought it was a little unfortunate that the forks weren't being used much anymore. The chief then called out to Masaru, thanking him sincerely for all the help he had given them and saying he wanted to express his gratitude in person. Mei came over and hugged Masaru, telling him that he had done an amazing job and that the plan had been a great success. Masaru felt genuinely happy hearing that. Meanwhile, Hera and Victinias were watching everything unfold on a giant screen. Hera remarked that even though they hadn't done anything, things seemed to be going well on their own. She then added that what Victinias had done wasn't really necessary. Victinias simply replied that everything was fine and that she hadn't been wrong to act as she did. Hera called her stubborn, reminding her that she had given Masaru 11 skills and that they shouldn't be worried about him anymore. She added that since Masaru had gained even more skills, he technically shouldn't exist now. Victinius wondered aloud if Hera had noticed it too. Hera nodded and said she had seen it at Zeus's place. Normally, a person started with only 1 or 2 skills. She admitted she didn't want to congratulate Masaru, but asked what they should do about him. Suddenly, Victinia said she hated how the world had remained stagnant for over 400 years, with nothing significant happening during all that time. That was why, if something had to change, they needed Masaru to take the role of the air detonator. As Masaru sat with everyone, they expressed their deep appreciation for him. They said that the reason they could now live safely, more securely than before, was all thanks to his efforts. Masaru felt it wasn't really that much work and thought to himself that he still had more plans, such as reinforcing the houses with wooden slabs. The chief commented that at this rate, their small village would soon become a city. Masaru laughed and mentioned that he really should make a toilet next, but then stopped himself, realizing it might not be the best topic to bring up. Still, he knew it was something necessary, even in a fantasy world. After a brief pause, he excused himself and asked if anyone knew anything about the slimes in the nearby area. Everyone was stunned and looked at him in disbelief, wondering if he truly meant those monsters. May quickly explained that those creatures could melt almost anything and were extremely dangerous. The chief added that Masaru didn't need to worry, since the slimes lived under the cliff and couldn't climb up. Hearing that, Masaru smiled in relief. It was exactly what he had hoped to hear. It was fortunate that the slimes couldn't reach them. However, his current concern was figuring out how to explain hygiene to everyone. He also wanted to prepare a proper sand or soil base for sanitation and needed the right materials for it. Cement, he thought, probably wasn't the best choice. He recalled once seeing a group of people making it from scratch using gravel and sand. Just then, an idea struck him, and he asked if there was an ocean nearby. His question left everyone speechless, and they remained silent for a moment. Masaru wondered if there was something wrong. After a pause, May managed to answer, saying there was indeed one, but that everyone from the rabbit race had fled from that place. Masaru was left confused by her response, unsure why they would run away from the ocean. The chief explained that their former home was located in the Masaru West, about 10 days of travel from there. They had once lived in that region but had been driven away by humans. Masaru was taken aback, realizing it was exactly as he had suspected. Something like that had truly happened. Despite everything, the rabbit people had still accepted a human like him among them. He apologized for asking such an unusual question, feeling that he had spoiled the mood. Yet deep down, he still felt responsible and determined to improve the plan for everyone's sake. To do that, he needed to gather certain materials from near the ocean. However, since those people carried painful memories of that place, he decided not to ask for their help and planned to go alone. His decision left everyone shocked. The next day, when Masaru was preparing to leave, he tied May with ropes and said he had already told her not to come, wondering why she was still so determined. She began to cry, saying it was because she wanted to be with him. Masaru was startled and asked if she really intended to leave her mother alone. Moreover, she couldn't even fight yet. She needed to be able to at least defeat a goblin. May countered that he was in the same situation, reminding him that he had only managed to defeat one goblin because they had tripped over themselves. Masaru felt awful after hearing that. Just then, the chief arrived and told May to listen to what Masaru was saying. He said she shouldn't go with him because she wouldn't be able to fight at all, and reminded her that he had always told her only to test her strength. If she went with Masaru, it could really get her killed. May hesitated, and Masaru commented that the chief was still the same as ever, also reminding him that he didn't need to come to see him off. The chief replied that there was something he wanted to give Masaru, a gift and a request as well. He handed something over and asked Masaru to wear it. When Masaru looked closer, he realized it was armor. The chief then said that if Masaru happened to meet any humans living in the nearby villages, he should let them know that the rabbit people were living safely. Masaru nodded and promised he wouldn't forget. He thought to himself that he needed to investigate what had happened in that area and uncover the truth. Before leaving, Masaru said that he was entrusting things to them and told them not to get too excited about whatever he might bring back. He asked May to be a good girl and stay home, even though she was crying as he departed. 4 days passed as Masaru traveled, and by then he had reached level 10. He found it amusing to see shells running along the shore, and with the help of his map skill, he managed to reach his destination by following the right path. When he finally saw the ocean, he felt happy. Since it was a different world, the journey had not been smooth. He had faced several attacks from beasts along the way. He recalled how, just the day before, he had been attacked by bandits who were targeting a carriage. He had drawn his weapon to fight them and found that there were many of them, but he still managed to defeat them using the goblin weapon. He thought they were surprisingly weak and believed that bad people had no right to harm others. However, he still used healing magic on them, as he couldn't bring himself to kill anyone. Afterward, he took the potions, herbs, and some weapons from their belongings. In return, they were able to keep their lives. To him, it felt like a fair trade. As he continued walking near the ocean, he suddenly received a signal and realized that there was a seaside town ahead, the very place where the rabbit people had once lived. Before entering, he decided to disguise himself as an adventurer. When he looked at the tall tower in the city, he noticed that it stood empty, and the entrance had been attacked by beasts. Upon entering the town, he found many goblins lurking around. Masaru was stunned, wondering if all those goblins were working overtime, and joked to himself that if they were, they probably wouldn't let him leave either. As the goblins charged toward him, he braced himself, realizing they were the kind that always moved in groups. Though some were small, their sheer numbers made them dangerous. With no other option, he drew the sword he had taken from the bandits and prepared to fight. Even though he didn't have any strong offensive magic or special attack skills, he still possessed swordsmanship, a skill he hadn't acquired through any slot, but one he already knew. It reminded him of the kendo he used to practice as a child, and he wondered if that too counted as a recognized skill in this world. He struck with a clean wrist movement, careful not to use lethal force since he hadn't fought seriously in a long time. Everything was going fine until suddenly, a massive goblin appeared, riding on an enormous wild boar. Masaru immediately guessed that it must be the village boss and wondered what he could possibly do against such an opponent. The beast charged at him relentlessly, its speed incredible. Masaru struggled to dodge and realized that he couldn't reach the goblin rider with his sword. He'd have to deal with the boar first. But its speed was so high that any mistake could cost him an arm. The whole fight felt like a deadly traffic accident waiting to happen. Then an idea struck him. If the boar was moving that fast, it was like a speeding car, which meant it couldn't stop easily. He quickly used his item box to pull out a large log and swung it with all his strength, striking the goblin and knocking it off the boar. As soon as the goblin boss hit the ground, Masaru rushed forward and finished it with a decisive strike. The other goblins froze in shock and then fled in panic. Masaru wondered if they were going to call for reinforcements. Before he could move, a volley of arrows suddenly rained down, taking out the fleeing goblins. Masaru turned to see a man on horseback approaching. The man introduced himself as the vice captain of the Gratis Kingdom's army and demanded that Masaru identify himself. Masaru stood frozen in shock as the man shouted at him, demanding if he could even hear them. The wiser commander stepped forward, calming his subordinate down and apologizing to Masaru for his knight's rudeness. He introduced himself as General Cook and explained that they had come to exterminate the goblins, though it seemed they had arrived too late. He asked if Masaru had defeated them all by himself and, realizing he had, thanked him sincerely for his help. Masaru introduced himself and explained that he had only come there to gather some resources. As he listened, he thought that since these people were from the kingdom, it meant the place was under their control. A perfect opportunity to learn what had happened to the rabbit village. However, he wasn't sure how to bring up the question. Another man approached Cook, questioning why he was speaking to Masaru alone, and if he had lost his mind. Cook mentioned that the reports had said there was a goblin rider among the enemies. The man was startled, admitting that such a foe was one even they hadn't been able to defeat. They turned to Masaru, asking if he was a local villager, whether he came from a nearby settlement, how old he was, what his job was, and if he even had proper identification. The flood of questions left Masaru completely confused. Cook interrupted, saying there was no need to pressure Masaru further. He then commented that since Masaru possessed such tremendous strength, perhaps he should join the knights. Masaru was taken aback. It felt like one of those moments straight out of a manga where the protagonist gets promoted instantly. However, he politely declined, explaining that he already had his own purpose and that it was the reason he had come all this way. Cook smiled and patted Masaru's shoulder, remarking that Masaru truly had a strong will, one that wasn't swayed by money, women, fame, or wealth, and said that he wanted his soldiers to look up to someone like him. Masaru then asked where the villagers had gone, since he couldn't see anyone around. Cook replied that they were likely taking shelter nearby and ordered one of his knights to go fetch them. Masaru said he wanted to take care of the corpses and asked if the knights could help him. Curious, Cook asked what he planned to do with them. Masaru explained that leaving the bodies as they were could attract monsters or wolves, and if they began to rot, it could spread disease. He suggested that they dig a pit, burn the corpses, and bury them properly afterward. Cook nodded, intrigued by his reasoning, and ordered his knights to assist in gathering the dead bodies. As they began their work, Masaru wondered if soldiers always had to obey such orders and whether their authority diminished when they operated outside their kingdom. Meanwhile, he searched for a suitable spot to bury the goblins and found an open space between two houses. From a screen, Hera and Victinius watched in disbelief. Victinius whispered that she had no idea what was happening and suggested they ask Masaru directly. Hera, however, told her to stay back for a while, reasoning that although the goblins were weak, Masaru shouldn't have been able to defeat so many, especially not one led by a goblin rider. There was no way someone like him could have taken that creature down. Hera wondered if she could take a look at Masaru's records. When she checked the documents, she was surprised to find that Masaru had ranked among the top 8 in kendo during his 3rd year of high school and had also placed 2nd in state-level boxing. For a summoned person, he seemed unusually normal. Victinius mentioned that it was strange. When Zeus had given him that body, it wasn't supposed to be like this, and she wondered if something had gone wrong. Hera paused to think, and recalled that Masaru's body had indeed been somewhat unusual when he was first summoned. Still, Victinius's words sounded off, as if there was something she wasn't saying clearly. Frustrated, Hera shouted at Victinius, asking why she was staying so calm in such a dangerous situation. In the worst-case scenario, Victinius explained, Masaru himself could become the detonator, or something even worse. But if Masaru were to be left as he was now, the entire world might end up being destroyed. People soon gathered and thanked the knights, relieved that they could finally live there peacefully again. Cook approached Chief Garv, expressing how glad he was that everyone had made it out safely. Garv said they could now return to their normal work and sincerely thanked the knights from the bottom of his heart. Cook told him that, while his gratitude was appreciated, it wasn't the knights who had defeated the goblins. It was Masaru, who had taken them all down by himself. He then suggested that, instead of forming a formal contract with the knights, Garv should offer Masaru a reward for his efforts. Masaru, a little embarrassed, said that he wasn't planning to refuse but felt hesitant about receiving anything. Cook insisted that Masaru had done all the hard work, and that thanks to him, there hadn't been a single casualty. He then turned to Garv, asking for his opinion. Garv agreed that Masaru had indeed saved them, but admitted that their village was in ruins and they didn't have much to give as a reward. He suggested that Cook himself should give something to Masaru. Masaru noticed Garv tearing up and reassured him not to worry, saying that he didn't want money anyway. Instead, he asked if he could have a few water jugs in a wooden box. Cook was surprised by the modest request and asked if Masaru was really fine with something so simple. Masaru nodded, explaining that he needed them to collect seawater and seashells. Cook, curious about his goal, asked why he needed such things if he had come for resources. Masaru replied that he couldn't fully explain it, but it was for building a dirt wall. Cook then told Garv to give Masaru what he wanted. Garv thought for a while and said that the wooden boxes were fine, but they needed the jugs to carry water from the ocean to the village. Losing them would cause real trouble. Wanting to ease the situation, Masaru decided to give a small reason. He told Garva that he no longer needed to carry water to the village since there was already a well next to the garden. Garva froze in shock and grabbed Masaru by the collar, demanding to know how he even knew about that. Masaru calmly replied that he had just seen it from a distance. The knights overheard the exchange and grew angry with Garv. They asked if the village hadn't been suffering from a shortage of water and crops, and whether that well was something he should have reported earlier. Masaru watched as the knights restrained Garv and prepared to take him away. Suddenly, a man rushed forward and grabbed Masaru's hand, his face filled with rage. The crowd began shouting, demanding to know why Masaru had done something like that and what he planned to do if their village ended up destroyed because of it. Masaru, trying to stay calm, said that they should be questioning the chief, not him. But before he could say more, the man struck out at him with a handheld weapon, shouting that Masaru was the one who had exposed the secret to the knights. Acting on instinct, Masaru countered with a punch, knocking the man back. But when he looked around, he saw others closing in on him, ready to attack. After some time, when the knights returned with the village chief tied up, they found that Masaru had already defeated the villagers, leaving Cook completely shocked. Masaru explained that those people had suddenly attacked him, though the goblins were much tougher. Cook shouted in frustration, asking what kind of chaos Masaru had caused, claiming that the villagers must have attacked him because he had revealed their secret. He questioned whether they had not only planned to kill Masaru, but also to keep their secret hidden. Masaru then asked what Cook planned to do next. Cook replied that normally, for hiding the well and the farm and even attacking someone, he would either execute those responsible or turn them into slaves. Everyone was stunned, while Masaru simply smiled and told them to wait. He said that if Cook agreed to his terms, he could choose to forget the incident, and if he did, then no one would be punished. He asked if that was acceptable, and Cook agreed, acknowledging that Masaru was the victim. Garv turned to Masaru and asked what his conditions were. Masaru said that they just needed to answer a few of his questions, and depending on their answers, he would consider doing them a favor. Cook wondered what Masaru was planning, while Masaru thought about where to begin. He then asked what had happened to the rabbit people, who had owned that village around 2 years ago. Everyone was shocked to hear such things. Garvey asked what Masaru was planning, and turned to the knights, questioning whether they allowed such interrogations. Masaru wondered if there was something wrong with his approach. As Garv began to lose his temper, Eldom, one of the knights, stepped in and told him to stop. Masaru grew confused, wondering why a knight was trying to defend the chief. Eldom asked why Masaru was questioning something that had happened 2 years ago. Masaru replied that he would explain once they answered his question, adding that there were people who still believed in him. Eldom wondered if he was referring to the rabbit people, and Masaru realized that the knights knew about them too. Eldom then spoke to Masaru, acknowledging his strength and admitting that even he might lose to him. But he continued, explaining that everything had started around 5 years ago, when the previous king had expanded the country, absorbing all the nearby states. One of those states was the current village, where Garv and he had fought in battle and won. Afterward, the rabbit people fled, and their land was taken over. Garv was then chosen as the village chief. Masaru understood that it wasn't pirates who had taken the land. It had been conquered by humans. All the rabbit people had been forced out. He then asked what had happened to those who hadn't escaped. He revealed that the ones who were captured had been enslaved. Masaru realized that even now, the rabbit people still mourned for those who had been taken away. Enraged, he stepped closer to Eldom and demanded that they release all the remaining rabbit people immediately. Cook tried to calm him down, saying he understood that Masaru was upset, but releasing them was impossible. They couldn't do it right away. Masaru said that in that case, he would defeat all of them, and Cook could take their place as slaves instead. Cook refused, saying Masaru couldn't act so recklessly. Masaru raised his voice, shouting that if he couldn't do something like that, then Cook was implying it was acceptable to enslave innocent rabbit people. He asked if following the law meant they could do anything they wanted, take anyone they pleased as slaves. Cook desperately tried to calm him, saying there was nothing they could do and the law wouldn't allow it. But Masaru shouted furiously, telling him not to deceive him. Those were murderous invaders who had no right to speak of justice. Everyone stood in stunned silence as Masaru turned to leave. He apologized for raising his voice and said he would give them some time to think. They should decide for themselves what they were going to do. As Masaru was leaving, a portal opened and Victinius appeared. She slapped him and demanded to know what he thought he was doing. She grabbed his hand and said she had brought him there to save the world, asking why he was yelling at people and picking fights, whether he would destroy the country just to make her cry, and if he hated her so much. Masaru denied the accusations, saying she had brought him there without his consent and that, because of that, he had been unable to meet the love of his life. Mei warned him to do nothing else and to lie low for a while, but Masaru refused, insisting those people would not fight him and challenging whether she really thought he could take on an entire army. Mei shouted that he could not. After a moment, Masaru asked her to wait, wondering what she meant and what was happening to his body. She replied that, in simple terms, he could fight an entire army by himself. Masaru learned about the spirit class from Victinius, though he didn't know much about it. Victinius explained that it meant he was on the same level as creatures formed from magic, which she found truly remarkable. She further explained that running would barely tire him, his magic would be much easier to control, and his physical strength was far greater than it should be. Masaru broke down upon realizing he might have already experienced some of those changes. Victinius continued, saying that Masaru was still at a low level, but as he increased his magic, the rate of his magic recovery and his other stats would improve as well. She mentioned that Masaru had done several things without considering the situation and sincerely apologized to him, saying that she had only disappeared for that reason. The next morning, Cook arrived with a few knights to meet Masaru. From their expressions, Masaru assumed they had agreed to release the rabid people. Cook confirmed it, saying that although the villagers were quite reluctant, they had agreed nonetheless. When Masaru spoke about releasing them, he meant all of the beast folk, and asked if Cook knew that other places wouldn't give in so easily. Masaru added that, setting aside the major cities for now, they should at least know the situation of the beast folk in the nearby villages, their numbers and species. Cook replied that all such details were recorded in their city. Masaru agreed and said that after checking those records, they would head to that place to meet the people in charge. Cook accepted the plan but seemed uneasy, which made Masaru wonder if something was wrong. Cook then said he was simply relieved that Masaru was far less tense than before. He then asked if something had happened the previous night. Masaru hesitated for a moment before saying that he was simply glad the negotiation had gone well. Cook didn't understand and asked what he meant by that. Masaru replied that he had thought if the negotiation hadn't worked, he would have had to settle things with his fists instead. The knights were shocked and urged him not to do anything like that. Cook said they had arranged a meeting to avoid any conflict and asked Masaru to get into the carriage, as they were heading to the city. On the way, Masaru couldn't help but wonder what kind of city it would be. Cook explained that it was the City of Knights, serving as the base of the Greta Kingdom's coastal knights. When they finally arrived, Masaru looked out and remarked that, as expected of the knight's base, the city had many well-built houses. Cook wondered if that was meant to be a compliment and added that while it wasn't exactly a fortress city, it could still give any attacker a hard time. After all, it was the city of knights. Masaru thought about it too. Compared to the fishing village, the city was far more developed, but the concept of sanitation still didn't seem to exist there. If this was considered standard, he definitely wouldn't want to live in such a place. He mentioned that he might be able to do something about the release of the beast folk, smiling softly as he said it. However, his gentle smile made the knights uneasy, as if something bad was about to happen. Cook told him they were heading toward the assembly hall, but they would first need to verify his identification at the front gate. Since Masaru was meeting with the chief, such a check was necessary, which was why Cook asked him to be ready with his guild card. Hearing that, Masaru began to sweat nervously, and then they went to the Adventurers Guild, where Cook grew angry and demanded to know what Masaru meant when he said he didn't have his guild card. He wondered if Masaru was one of those people who slacked off instead of registering properly, reminding him that everyone knew he was supposed to register once he turned 12. Masaru thought he was done for, but he was unexpectedly saved by Captain Cook's misunderstanding. The lady at the counter thanked Masaru for waiting and asked him to place his hand on the magical device in front of him. When Masaru touched it, the tool emitted a bright light, shocking him, as it automatically began creating a card. The lady explained that guild cards were a divine technology granted by the gods. She warned him that fraud and forgery were serious crimes, punable by law. She added that while personal information would remain hidden, the card would still display his name, guild registration details, and criminal record. The data could only be used for identification, and as long as the card's owner was alive, it was impossible for anyone to access detailed personal information. Masaru was impressed that his personal information was properly protected, and he finally received his guild card. Just then, a man nearby remarked that it looked like Masaru had gotten it and asked him to show the card. He added that identity verification also required revealing all of the basic information displayed on it. Masaru wondered if touching it would make everything appear, and it really did. He thought it resembled his status screen and must have been created by God. The others were left in shock, unable to even speak. Masaru wondered if having that many skills was abnormal. He quickly hid it and apologized, saying he had made some mistakes. Cook asked him not to act as if nothing had happened. Eldom asked Cook what was with those skills and if people normally had only one or two. Cook continued, mentioning the titles, saying it was his first time seeing something like that, and that Masaru even had 5 of them. Masaru shouted for them to just forget about it, adding that since they had already seen it, it should be enough to know he wasn't a spy or a criminal, so they should just overlook it. Eldom said it wasn't as if anyone would believe them anyway, adding that they might even be called liars and punished for it. When all 3 of them fell silent for a while, Cook said it was an emergency meeting and that they needed to decide what to include in the report. He told Masaru to make sure his story was consistent, and Masaru agreed. At the assembly hall, a lady said everything seemed to be in order and that they had been expecting Masaru, so they should proceed to the first meeting room. As they walked, Cook remarked that they had somehow made it through, though it had been terrifying. Masaru replied that he suddenly felt exhausted. While they were on their way, Cook mentioned that Masaru would soon be meeting a representative of the city, who was also the leader of the knights, and that normally, arranging such a meeting so quickly would be impossible. However, he said it was allowed because Masaru seemed interesting and advised him to be polite in his words. Cook then knocked on the door, saying he had brought the person he had mentioned. Masaru was asked to come in, where a few people were seated, and the ruler of the city, Lancelot, introduced himself. Masaru felt that Lancelot's aura was completely different from that of other knights, and he realized that the negotiation might not be as easy as he had expected. He stepped closer, thanking Lancelot for giving him the opportunity. Just as he was about to continue, Lancelot interrupted, saying there was no need to beat around the bush. He had already been informed of the reason Masaru had come, which was to personally negotiate the release of the beast folk. In other words, the negotiation depended on what Masaru was willing to offer in exchange for their freedom. It appeared, however, that Masaru had no intention of offering money or trade goods, and Lancelot was curious to see what kind of offer he would make. Masaru thought that Lancelot was far more composed and logical than he had imagined, which made the situation tougher. He understood that any attempt to deceive Lancelot would backfire badly, so the best option was to be honest and face him directly. Lancelot remarked that it would be the biggest deal the city had seen since its founding and asked what Masaru intended to offer. Taking a deep breath, Masaru said he would offer his knowledge. The others were confused, unsure what he meant. Lancelot asked him to elaborate, and Masaru explained that with his knowledge, he could reduce the death rate, improve the food supply, and create plans to increase employment, productivity, and overall quality of life in the town. The others were astonished, and Masaru gave an example. The horse carriage would be the first thing he would improve. When Lancelot wondered what he meant, Masaru explained that while riding, he had noticed how much the carriages shook during movement, so he planned to introduce springs, a mechanism that absorbed shocks and vibrations, something none of the city's carriages currently had. One of the people questioned whether he meant he could create a carriage that wouldn't shake at all. Masaru clarified that while it wouldn't be completely stable, it would be many times smoother than the current ones. Furthermore, instead of letting the horses go bare-hoofed, he intended to make another improvement. But before he could continue, a man standing behind Lancelot called out to signal something. Lancelot told Masaru that he understood what Masaru was offering, and it seemed like exactly the kind of thing the city would eventually need. He was certain that such knowledge could bring about remarkable improvements if it truly produced results. However, he admitted that he couldn't trust Masaru immediately, nor could he rely on something intangible. Masaru's offer was convincing, but it was the sort of proposal that only small towns or villages would accept without hesitation. Therefore, Lancelot said Masaru would have to stay in the city until he could demonstrate visible results. Masaru wondered if Lancelot was asking him to join as a knight. Lancelot replied that Masaru had already declined that offer, and although it was a shame to lose someone of his strength, they accepted his decision. What he meant, Lancelot clarified, was that until results were shown, the beast folk would remain in custody. If no results appeared, Masaru would have to stay until he succeeded, or die trying. In other words, Masaru was offering not only his knowledge but also his future. Masaru accepted the terms without hesitation, leaving everyone shocked. Lancelot then stated that Masaru would be responsible for improving two aspects of the city: sanitation and horse carriages. As soon as even minor progress was visible in those areas, the beast folk would be released to him. While Masaru listened carefully, Lancelot continued, saying Masaru could discuss the details with his secretary if any issues arose. Masaru refused, saying the conditions were already more favorable than he had expected. Lancelot then revealed that Masaru had misunderstood. By agreeing to this, he was actually giving Lancelot the chance to eliminate beast folk who might rebel at any moment while still gaining the benefits of Masaru's knowledge. For Lancelot, it was an excellent deal. He also expressed disdain for labeling the beast folk invasion and plague as war, emphasizing his resentment toward that notion. Masaru realized that the city's leader wasn't a bad person at all. Lancelot went on to say that he would arrange to gather the scattered beast folk, but the real problem would be dealing with those who opposed their release. He then asked Masaru if he had any interesting ideas to handle that issue. With a chilling smile, Masaru replied that he did. A devilish one. Lancelot seemed genuinely pleased by that kind of thinking. Masaru then asked whether the city wasn't known as the City of Knights, and if so, why not settle the matter through a duel? He suggested that he would fight anyone who opposed the release of the beast folk, and the loser would have to accept the result without any further complaints. Surprised, Lancelot stood up and exclaimed that it was a brilliant idea, one that would also make for quite a spectacle. Glancing at a sword hanging nearby, he remarked that there would be plenty of fools unwilling to admit defeat. Then, grabbing the sword, he added that if the opponent happened to be the strongest orc in the city, then the one who defeated him would have the right to release the beast folk. That way, everyone would have no choice but to accept the outcome. Masaru was taken aback and finally understood what Lancelot meant. Lancelot explained that the people he referred to were only capable of fighting goblins. They had never witnessed Masaru's true strength. That was why Masaru was being challenged to a spar. Masaru was taken aback when he noticed that the moment Lancelot picked up the sword, his eyes began to gleam with excitement. It was clear that he was a battle junkie. Masaru respectfully declined the duel, thinking that it would cause serious problems if the city's leader ended up injured. Lancelot, amused, asked if Masaru was implying that he would win. Taking that as a challenge, Lancelot declared the match settled and instructed that the training grounds be prepared. Cook agreed to make the arrangements. Masaru accepted and asked to be informed of the date and time. Returning to the main topic, Masaru said that, although it might seem sudden, he wanted to begin as soon as possible and asked if there was a place where he could hold a session. He explained that he wanted to give everyone a lecture on hygiene. Lancelot asked if he meant a study session, and Masaru confirmed it, saying he would teach why maintaining good hygiene was important, what practices to avoid, and how to improve and uphold sanitation standards. The knights looked puzzled. Masaru told them that was precisely why he wanted everyone to gather. One of the knights stood up, saying he would fetch his smartest subordinates, and the others began to rise as well. Masaru then announced that anyone who failed to attend would have to take a makeup lecture later. Since even some of the higher-ups who were present at the meeting seemed reluctant, he pointed out that their absence would set a bad example for everyone else. Lancelot, smiling, said it seemed Masaru had everything under control and that he would leave the matter in his hands. adding that if Masaru needed him, he would be available for entertainment. Masaru, however, stated that Lancelot would also be attending the lecture. During the meeting with the knights, Masaru began teaching that the city's biggest issue stemmed from poor sanitation practices. As he explained basic things, such as boiling water before drinking, washing hands and clothes properly, and maintaining general cleanliness, everyone looked irritated, clearly unimpressed by what they considered trivial advice. Masaru quickly realized that he was talking about matters so simple that even a primary school student would understand them. Yet the knights seemed to struggle with the concept. Lancelot himself admitted he hadn't expected Masaru to be able to conduct a lecture so suddenly, and asked if Masaru truly believed that following such practices could make a significant difference. Masaru replied that if people learned to maintain a clean living environment, the city's death rate would decrease across all ages, from newborns to adults, and it might even be possible to prevent the spread of plagues altogether. Though he wasn't an expert in medicine, he said he would gladly share the knowledge he did have. Annoyed, Lancelot asked who Masaru even was to speak so confidently about such things. He explained that the plague hadn't yet reached the kingdom's capital, but since it was extremely dangerous, hardly anyone dared to study it. Any information about it was incredibly valuable, and in his view, Masaru's proposal made the deal feel heavily one-sided. Confused, Masaru listened as Lancelot continued, saying they would support him in whatever he needed, though not unconditionally, and would lend their strength where possible. Masaru thought that since Lancelot's side stood to benefit the most, that arrangement was perfectly fine. Lancelot agreed, saying that being indebted to others wasn't very professional anyway. Masaru then mentioned that it would be rude to hold back and added that there was something he did need help with. He asked if he could borrow the smithing workshop starting the next day, as he needed to begin working on improvements for the horse carriage and had several experiments in mind. Lancelot agreed to make the arrangements, explaining that while there was nothing wrong with the workshop itself, they lacked a skilled blacksmith. Being a coastal base, most of their best craftsmen had long been recruited by the capital. When Masaru visited the workshop, he was shocked. Piles of unused materials were scattered everywhere, creating a mess. Seeing it for himself, he immediately called out that anyone available would do and that he needed manpower right away. He ordered that a complete inventory of all materials be finished by the end of the day, saying the current state was unacceptable and could hardly even be called a workshop. Lancelot, puzzled, asked what he meant by an inventory. Masaru explained that it was a detailed list of all the materials stored there, including the type and quantity of each, so he could know exactly what resources they had to work with. Lancelot added that he also wanted a record of any broken items, material degradation, or other abnormalities. Then he asked Masaru to pause the cleaning for a moment, insisting that, since they were still a military organization, the place should at least have been kept somewhat orderly. That remark only made Masaru angrier. He shouted in frustration, demanding to know why nothing was organized and why the workshop was covered in dust. For someone like him, who had worked in a home center, such sloppiness was completely unacceptable. He thought about how, in his old workplace, they managed tens of thousands of products and tools at any given time, and a single cataloging error could lead to hours of wasted searching. Turning to Lancelot, Masaru said he would take charge of the task himself and asked him to send over some men to help restore order. He declared that he would show them the true meaning of inventory management. Once the workers arrived, Masaru began writing notes and assigning instructions, directing everyone on how to sort, record, and arrange the materials properly. By the next day, the workshop had been transformed. Everything was neat, labeled, and categorized. However, as Masaru examined the materials, he realized that while he recognized copper, many of the others were completely unfamiliar to him. Black steel and crimson ore, for instance, were clearly fantasy materials he had never encountered before. Puzzled, he asked one of the workers if they didn't think there was too much stock and how the city's finances could even support such waste. The man hesitated before admitting that there was actually more on the way. Shocked, Masaru listened as the man explained that they were bound by a long-term contract to buy those ores, a deal signed even before their arrival in the city, and it still had another year before it expired. Masaru sighed and thought they should at least start refining the ore into ingots so it could be put to use. He added that even though he wasn't familiar with some of the materials, he could experiment with them to create useful alloys. Curious, the man standing behind him asked what an alloy was. Masaru explained that mixing copper and tin would create a metal called bronze, which could be used to make armor. It was stronger than copper, though not as strong as iron, which itself was an alloy. He mentioned that he personally wanted to try making stainless steel, but that would require iron and chromium. As he was about to continue, someone interrupted him, wondering what exactly he was trying to say. Masaru realized they didn't understand and thought about how to explain it better. He then went on to clarify that When a metal's strength or properties didn't suit their needs, it could be mixed with another metal to form an alloy with new, useful characteristics. However, if the process was done poorly, it would only waste materials. After explaining this, he excused himself, saying he needed to organize the inventory documents. Once he left, he thought the place was finally cleaned up, so he decided to experiment with his smithing skill. As he checked the process, he wondered if it was possible to create a sword merely by imagining it. He believed it might depend on his skill level, but if that was the case, then it truly felt like a cheat-level ability. It seemed that the skills granted by the skill ticket were indeed special. Now, it was only a matter of how precise he could become. He placed a few materials together and used his power from a distance to turn them into a brick-like structure, realizing that if he mastered this technique, he could make anything. Excited, he began crafting smaller items. After several hours, he looked at a knife and thought about the parts embedded in its handle. While dismantling it, he wondered, if he had the skill to take it apart, couldn't he just make one himself? Unable to resist the urge to try, he began melting and hammering iron. People outside watched him working as he darkened the room and quenched the heated metal. By cooling it rapidly in water, he was able to greatly increase its hardness and strength. The result reflected all the experience he had gained from making farm tools during his school practical lessons. Masaru widened the blade he was working on, and when Lancelot arrived, he grew excited at the sight of Masaru actually forging weapons. Masaru, startled to see him, asked how long he had been there. Lancelot replied that he had been there since the afternoon and that they had finished sorting out the storage in the pack, so he thought he would sharpen his sword while he was around. What caught his attention more, however, was the blade Masaru was forging. Masaru replied that he should be able to make a better blade than that one. Lancelot drew his sword and asked Masaru to give it a few strikes, saying that lately it hadn't been cutting as well as it used to, no matter how many times he sharpened it. Examining the sword, Masaru thought it was just a piece of metal beaten into the shape of a blade. He then said he might be able to improve it and asked Lancelot to hand it over for a while. Lancelot, having high expectations, did so, though he couldn't help but feel curious about the objects placed on the table nearby. Masaru mentioned that he would reveal their purpose the next day and asked Lancelot to come and check them out then. He added that he had discovered something and wanted to discuss it with him as well. Lancelot grew increasingly curious, while Masaru, filled with excitement, said that he was about to start on the next part and that Lancelot could go wherever he wanted. As Lancelot left, he couldn't help but think that Masaru was an unyielding and strong-willed person. By nightfall, Masaru was still working. He had created several things, and wondered why he found so much joy in making others happy and being useful to them. Deep down, he realized he truly loved crafting. The next day, he planned to bring his creations to town and teach everyone how to use them. He also needed to continue his sanitation lectures for a while, but for now, he simply wanted to keep creating a little longer. The next morning, while Masaru was sleeping at his workplace, a girl came to wake him up. He woke up half asleep and asked who she was. She said she was a messenger, explaining that the nights were too busy, so she had been sent to run errands for them. After confirming his identity, she informed him that 3 days later, in the afternoon, he would have a duel with Lancelot in the training area. She also added that he was required to report there that morning and that attendance was strictly compulsory. Masaru was annoyed, realizing he had almost forgotten about the duel. The girl thought he was quite a strange person and mentioned that he would soon have to meet that old man, while noting that Lancelot seemed excited about the duel. Masaru remarked that Lancelot was a battle junkie who never listened to him and had made the decision entirely on his own. The girl was surprised that Masaru had managed to catch Lancelot's interest. She then told him that a medical team would be present during the match, so he should be careful not to go overboard. Masaru stood up, stretched, and said he would try his best not to hurt Lancelot too badly. The girl teased him, wondering if he thought he wasn't going to lose. Masaru replied that it was kind of scary how she said the exact same thing as Lancelot. He then asked her to tell Lancelot to meet him at the town plaza later. When she asked if he wanted something from Lancelot, Masaru answered that he planned to give a little demonstration there. When Lancelot arrived at the town plaza later, he wondered where Masaru was. At that moment, Masaru was inside a well with the help of some knights, setting up a pipe. After finishing the setup, he asked them to pull him up. Cook explained that Masaru had gone into the well to install some kind of contraption. As Masaru climbed out, he saw that Lancelot had arrived right on time. Lancelot pointed out that those were the same machine parts he had seen the previous night. Masaru confirmed it and explained that the device was designed to pump water, then suggested they begin right away. He asked everyone to gather around and announced that he was about to demonstrate a new tool that would make drawing water much easier. He told them it was simple to use, so they only needed to pay attention. He then pointed to a woman and asked her to help with the demonstration. She approached hesitantly, wondering if there was really anything she could do. Masaru assured her that it didn't matter whether she was a woman or a man. Even a child could handle it. He asked her to pour some water into the pump's opening and then move the lever up and down repeatedly. After a short while, water began flowing out, astonishing everyone, who called it magic. Masaru explained that the device was called a pump, and he would be installing similar ones at all major wells across the city, asking everyone to use them carefully. Next, Masaru turned his attention to improving the horse-drawn carriages. He inspected one, recalling that he had ridden in similar ones before and found their design very primitive. Examining it from below, he saw a metal axle running across the underside with the carriage body mounted directly on top. Lancelot wondered what Masaru planned to do. Masaru explained that he intended to separate the passenger compartment from the wheelbase, attach a frame to the wheels, and suspend the seating area using springs at both the front and back. Lancelot couldn't quite understand, so Masaru described the design more clearly, admitting he had yet to test whether his mechanism to reduce shaking would actually work. They began constructing the foundation according to his instructions. Using his designs and power, along with help from the men, Masaru built the first prototype. However, he soon ran out of mana and told Lancelot to take a slow, careful ride to test it. Lancelot agreed, ordered the knights to bring a horse, and after riding for a while, returned to Masaru. When Masaru asked for his thoughts, Lancelot said he was amazed. The carriage didn't shake at all, and every ride he had taken before now felt like a lie. It was so comfortable because of the mechanism Masaru had created. Masaru explained that the city's carriages lacked any suspension, so he had added parts that could absorb impact. He added that, if he remembered correctly, there were various types of suspension systems, and he hoped to experiment with different models of shock absorbers in the future. Lancelot wondered if it would be possible to make the passenger area larger. Masaru agreed, explaining that for the day, he only wanted to focus on the suspension system, but they would eventually work on expanding the passenger section as well. He added that he wanted to design a carriage large enough to carry around 9 or 10 people. Lancelot was delighted with Masaru's progress and remarked that future expedition campaigns would surely become much more comfortable. Masaru replied that by gradually improving and building upon existing technologies, they would eventually achieve even greater breakthroughs. Just then, a knight approached Lancelot, asking if he could take the next ride, and another knight requested the same. Lancelot, a bit taken aback, told them they would have their turn next time and decided to end the tests for the day. Masaru then pulled Lancelot aside to speak privately, while the knights continued trying out the new carriage. Lancelot commented that such inventions were truly convenient and that with them, everyone's lives would undoubtedly improve. Masaru said he had also created 2 or 3 other tools and needed to teach the craftsmen how they worked so that they could produce and repair them whenever necessary. Lancelot realized that this was the matter Masaru had mentioned, wanting to discuss the previous day. Masaru reminded him that during the meeting, Lancelot had emphasized the importance of maintaining balanced agreements. Lancelot agreed, saying that he believed their side's offer might still be insufficient, and asked what Masaru desired in return. Masaru proposed an agreement to halt all invasions between the beastfolk and humans, and to hand over the surplus inventory of ores in their possession. Both of them remained silent for a moment, considering the offer. Then Sloth wondered aloud if that was truly all. When Masaru confirmed it, Lancelot agreed and finalized the deal, remarking that a treaty combined with technological exchange was a fair arrangement that benefited both sides. Masaru felt relieved, knowing that with this agreement in place, the beastfolk would finally be able to live in peace after their release. Masaru wondered if it was really all right for him to take just the leftover ore. Lancelot replied that it was fine as long as it didn't affect the lives of the townspeople. He added that he could swear on his life there would be no invasion from his city. However, he admitted he didn't have the authority to prevent or oppose decisions made by the entire country, so Masaru would need to stay cautious. Masaru smiled and thanked him sincerely. Lancelot laughed as he walked away, saying he would see Masaru at their duel in 3 days and was looking forward to a good fight. Masaru stood there, shocked, yet deeply grateful. He thought that thanks to Lancelot, the human invasions would likely cease, at least for the most part. It was only a verbal agreement, but since Lancelot was an honest man, Masaru believed he wouldn't break his word. Completely worn out, Masaru decided to return home and rest, especially since he had little magic left. Just then, someone ran up to him, saying that everyone had already gathered for the hygiene lecture and urging him to hurry. Soon after, others came to him with different requests, which only made him more frustrated. By the time Masaru finally got home that night, both his mind and body were utterly exhausted. Teaching and explaining technology to people with no prior understanding had turned out to be far more difficult than he had imagined. He was reminded of his past world, where various craftsmen had taught him the ins and outs of their trades until he earned his license. Now, He finally understood the effort and patience they had shown him. Feeling completely drained, he looked out the window, thinking about the people who were no longer under the same moon or sky as he was. He began softly singing a song, but suddenly heard a voice say it was so cringe. Looking up, Masaru saw Victinius sitting on a nearby rooftop, with a sad expression. She wondered if the song was from his hometown, one about people who had been permanently separated, where the singer had given up hope of ever meeting their loved one again, yet still wished to tell them their feelings in person. Masaru nodded, explaining that it was actually a poem from the Hyakunin Ishu. He even recited a few verses, though he couldn't remember the rest. Victinius smiled faintly and teased that he must have been thinking about someone he liked when he said that poem. Masaru hesitated, feeling embarrassed. When Victinius asked what kind of person she was, he jumped down from his window onto the rooftop and began describing her. He said the girl was cute and had a small frame. The first time he saw her, she was working with all her heart, giving everything she had. He thought it might have been love at first sight. A few months later, he decided to confess his feelings, though he admitted he wasn't good at that sort of thing and probably stumbled over his words. Still, he made sure his feelings were clear. But a few years later, she had married into another family. Victinius felt sorry for him. Masaru admitted that it still hurt a little even now, but after some time, he had managed to congratulate her on her marriage. Coincidentally, he had once met a child in the rabbit village who shared her name, and it had taken him completely by surprise. It was just something that came to mind, and before he knew it, he'd ended up talking about it all. Feeling sad, Victinius apologized. Masaru said that maybe this was what she had meant the last time they parted, and after everything he had done and all the lives he had influenced, it was a bit too late for regret. He told her not to worry, then leaned against her shoulder and said that ever since meeting the rabbit people, he'd found new motivation. He added that he was truly thankful to her, because in a way, those feelings had saved him. Victinius stood up abruptly, making him lose balance, and playfully declared that she was the goddess who had brought him there in the first place, so of course anyone would feel better just by being in her presence. Masaru sighed in frustration, thinking how easily she got carried away. When she looked at him curiously, he met her eyes and said that, even though she was a useless one, she was still technically a goddess. Victinius was instantly annoyed by the remark, and Masaru, realizing his mistake, quickly apologized, saying he was truly grateful to her for bringing him into this world and begged her forgiveness. She smiled and accepted his apology. Feeling re-energized, Masaru stood up and said he would head to the smithing workshop to get back to work. Victinius, still surprised, said she would stay there a little longer to enjoy the quiet night. As Masaru walked away, she remained on the rooftop, gazing silently at the moon. During the 3 days following the incident with Tunisia, Masaru had no time to rest. He went from town to town informing people about what had happened, and whenever he had a moment to spare, he used it to prepare for the upcoming battle. Finally, the day of the duel arrived. As Masaru approached the training ground, he noticed a large crowd gathered there. He went straight to Lancelot and asked what was going on. Lancelot remarked that he was impressed Masaru hadn't run away. Masaru replied that he wasn't there to hear something like that, and admitted he hadn't expected the duel to turn into such a grand spectacle. It practically looked like a festival. Lancelot explained that Masaru should forgive his subordinates, as that was just how they behaved whenever he drew his sword. However, he said there was something more important he wanted to ask Masaru, about his sword, which Masaru had promised to improve. Lancelot asked where it was. Masaru teased him, saying he shouldn't say such foolish things, and asked who in their right mind would hand over their weapon to an opponent before a duel. Lancelot was stunned, and Masaru even apologized, saying he had broken the sword Lancelot had given him for reference. Lancelot replied that he would hold on to that resentment and go all out in their duel that day. Masaru looked at Lancelot's massive black sword and thought it seemed to be made of tougher metal than the one Lancelot had provided him earlier, though the craftsmanship was about the same. He asked if that was the sword Lancelot would be using, adding that it just looked like a regular sword. Masaru then drew his own weapon, and Lancelot commented that it would make the short sword all the more adorable to him when he drank his victory's sake that night. Masaru replied that it would be a pity if Lancelot got injured after losing, and said he would do his best to hold back. Lancelot rested his sword on his shoulder and told Masaru not to hold back, as it had been a long time since he'd faced such an opponent. He mentioned that the last time someone had said such words to him was when he was a new recruit, and that he had made everyone who underestimated him eat those words. Masaru wondered what kind of experience Lancelot had with losing. Lancelot responded that he had never been defeated by any human. Masaru was taken aback, remarking that all his preparations might turn out to be meaningless. Lancelot asked if Masaru had some kind of strategy, adding that he was curious to see it. Although Masaru didn't seem to think much of the statement, there weren't many people capable of taking down a goblin rider alone. In other words, Lancelot asked Masaru to attack him with all his might. Masaru agreed, and the two finally stepped into the training ground, where the crowd erupted into cheers. Among them, Masaru noticed a messenger girl who had managed to get a good seat to watch, leaving him curious about who she was. That girl smiled at him, and soon after the referee stepped onto the training ground, announced that the duel between Lancelot and Masaru was about to begin. It would be a single match, ending when one of them could no longer continue or surrendered. The referee urged them to strive for a fair and honorable duel with no untoward incidents, and with that, the match began. Both of them clashed their swords, and a man standing next to the messenger girl asked what she thought about the fight. She reminded him that she had already told him countless times not to address her as Oju. Taking a closer look at Masaru, she noted that he didn't seem like a fighter, yet he spoke as if he had a solid winning strategy. Another observer beside her remarked that the deciding factor would be whether Lancelot could see through Masaru's plan. If he did, the match might end quickly. At first glance, the two appeared evenly matched, which surprised the onlookers. Lancelot told Masaru that it was truly impressive to find someone capable of rivaling him in sheer strength. Masaru replied that they should end it with his victory. Lancelot then twisted his sword to throw Masaru's blade into the air and told him to show everything he had. Taking advantage of the opening, Lancelot landed a heavy kick on Masaru. As he swung again, Masaru barely dodged and, startled, asked if Lancelot was trying to kill him. Lancelot called him a strange man, saying that Masaru clearly had strength and experience with the sword, judging by his stance. Yet his techniques were dreadful. He struck again, pushing Masaru back, and remarked that at least Masaru had good instincts. They continued fighting, and Masaru realized that the match had come down to battle experience. He couldn't move as freely as he wanted. He remembered Victinia's once telling him that he could fight a war alone, but at that moment, it didn't seem possible. Still, he understood that he had managed to confirm exactly what he needed for his strategy. He decided to use his ultimate move, one refined through years of experience working in the countryside home center. He had spent countless hours studying so he could handle any kind of task. And now, the efforts of all the craftsmen who had taught him their trades would come together in this moment. Drawing upon everything he had learned, he prepared to put his full knowledge to use. Without relying on his item box, he caused several large logs to appear around him. Lancelot was astonished to see this, realizing that Masaru was a skilled user of such techniques, though nothing about that had appeared in his status report. He asked in disbelief if Masaru really intended to use those logs to try and trip him. Lancelot was left confused when Masaru activated a combination of skills, woodworking, smithing, and construction, to assemble enormous mechanisms with beam-like structures. Massive siege weapons appeared all around Lancelot, leaving him stunned. Masaru thought that the advantage of using production skills lay in the precision of their results. The final creations took shape exactly as envisioned. It was even possible to create battering rams with the hammer parts already raised. Given his current magic and skill levels, the things he could form instantly were limited to relatively simple structures, but using them for multi-directional attacks could still prove effective. However, Lancelot quickly cut down each of the siege weapons with his sword, looking disappointed as he wondered if Masaru was underestimating him. He thought that Masaru was keeping his distance to prepare another skill, perhaps to scatter those mad angels again, and decided that if that happened, he would close the gap before Masaru could complete the move. The messenger girl seemed to realize something and called out to Lancelot. At that moment, Masaru stood ready with a massive bow and arrow. From that position, even if Lancelot moved, the situation could turn dangerous. Masaru released the giant arrow toward Lancelot, who swiftly swung his sword and split it into two pieces. Taking advantage of the brief opening, Masaru rushed forward and struck. Lancelot stepped in, thinking that the only thing he could use to defend himself now was his arm. But if he could turn it into a close-range battle like before, he might still have a chance. Before he could react further, Masaru's blade sliced through Lancelot's sword and sent him tumbling to the ground. The referee immediately declared the match over, announcing Masaru as the winner. Lancelot realized that this was exactly what Masaru had been aiming for from the start. Masaru had been confident all along that Lancelot's sword would eventually break. Masaru admitted that, at first, he had only thought it might work, since the blade looked fragile. But he did have at least some kind of guarantee. He had, in fact, deliberately broken the sword Lancelot had previously given him as a test. However, that sword had been made of a different material from the one Lancelot was using now, so Masaru's plan still involved a fair bit of risk. Afterwards, it had simply been a matter of creating a strategy that would allow him to slice through the sword directly. Lancelot understood then that the battering rams and the giant bow had been part of that very strategy. Masaru explained that the giant bow was a siege weapon known as Blystar. He admitted that he had never expected Lancelot to cut through the arrow without retreating, but it had been enough to halt his movement. and that brief opening was all Masaru needed to move in and destroy his blade. Lancelot said that Masaru had seen things clearly from the start. That was one way to fight a battle, not relying on swordsmanship skills alone, but on the quality and ingenuity of one's weapon. Masaru replied that the only thing the duel had proven was that he could create weapons. That was precisely why he hadn't handed one to Lancelot before the duel. He then took out a giant sword and offered it to Lancelot as a gift, saying it was his way of making a fair exchange with someone like him, a warrior who had come out of nowhere to challenge him in a duel. The sword, he added, was a token of his appreciation, and he doubted there was anyone else out there who could defeat Lancelot. Lancelot took the sword, gave it a swing, and found it unbelievable. He remarked that giving him such a weapon before the duel would have been a terrible idea for Masaru. He added that he might have said it before, but he was a warrior who truly loved to fight, whether with swords or by any other means, and the joy he felt came from the experience and growth gained through battle. Those were the feelings he always carried with him onto the battlefield. Lancelot continued, saying that comrades who shared his passion for battle had once naturally gathered around him, and it was their presence that had allowed him to keep swinging his sword. But one day, when he looked back, there was no one left who would come near him. He found it rather ironic. Even though a war could never be fought by one person, the stronger he became, the fewer battles there were for him to fight. He recalled how he had ended up spending his days simply polishing his sword, and before he realized it, he was practically carrying the entire organization on his own. His victories had become so effortless that even those he fought could no longer put up a proper challenge. Yet, despite that emptiness, this duel had truly been interesting to him. For the first time in a long while, he had actually enjoyed himself. That was why he told Masaru not to rely solely on the sword. There was no one left who could defeat him, and to fight was to grow. And Masaru had certainly grown a great deal. He said that when time passed, Masaru should become even stronger than he was now. And when that happened, they should fight again someday. Masaru replied that he would rather pass on another duel, but if it meant seeing Lancelot go all out once more, then perhaps, someday, they could fight again. Lancelot then declared that he officially recognized Masaru as the winner and would now fulfill the promise he had made. Immediately afterward, he announced that all enslaved beastfolk were to be released and granted their freedom. That same night at a tavern in the City of Knights, Cook and Eldom were having a meal at the bar. Eldom was surprised, thinking about how Cook had managed to use production-type skills like that to survive in battle. He wondered what Cook thought about it, and suggested that since Cook's younger brother worked in construction, maybe he could train him to do the same. Cook laughed, saying it was rare for Eldom to make a joke like that, and added that he could only pull it off if he had as many skills as Masaru. Lancelot suddenly appeared behind them, questioning whether Masaru really possessed that many skills. Startled, Cook and Eldom froze, and, without turning around, Cook muttered, wondering what that person was talking about. When they finally looked back and saw Lancelot, they were both shocked and quickly said it was a misunderstanding. Lancelot told them to calm down and took a seat, assuring them not to worry. He wasn't going to harm them, but only wanted to talk. He mentioned that they were the ones who had brought Masaru to the city, and that there was a significant difference between the Masaru he had fought and the one they knew. When Lancelot received Masaru's report, he found that Masaru's level matched the official record, but he had around 20 skills and even held a title, an unbelievably large deviation from the norm. Cook remarked that, considering Masaru's abilities, he could have believed it if Masaru's level were around 60 or 70, but the fact that he was only level 16 was astonishing. Lancelot noted that it was far lower than his own current level of 62, and he understood why they had decided to conceal the truth, as anyone would panic upon seeing such numbers. Cook added that not even the knights nor anyone else in the world possessed abilities like that. Lancelot then suggested letting the matter go, saying that in Masaru's case, it would be more entertaining to let him act freely. Eldom commented that what Lancelot said sounded a bit pitiful. Lancelot replied that he had managed to get Masaru to promise a second duel, but it was unfortunate that, for now, their connection with him was coming to an end. He added that if either of them wished to keep an eye on Masaru, they could. Just then, the messenger girl arrived, asking whether they wanted to cooperate with Masaru, teasing that there happened to be someone with a messenger's role who was conveniently free for the task. A few days later, in front of the assembly hall, Masaru met Lancelot and said he remembered what Lancelot had mentioned during their duel, asking if the beastfolk had truly been released and whether it was fine for him to leave now. Lancelot assured him it was fine, and explained that the improvements Masaru had made were already showing results. As for the beastfolk, they were still in the process of gathering them all and would contact Masaru again at his village. Masaru agreed, then noticed the bruises on Lancelot's face, and jokingly asked if he had gotten into a fight, and if there was really anyone capable of leaving bruises on someone like him. Lancelot replied that it was someone he couldn't bring himself to raise his hands against and clarified that it didn't mean that person was stronger than him. Suddenly, a girl appeared and kicked Lancelot, exclaiming that it was terrible of him to talk that way about a woman of marriageable age. Masaru recognized her as the same girl who had acted as the messenger earlier. Lancelot introduced her as Adelina, his 19-year-old niece, a spirited tomboy. Adelina thanked Lancelot for introducing her and told Masaru that she would be in his care from that day onward. She said she would do her best to be useful and fulfill the role she had been given. Masaru was confused, as it was the first time he had heard anything about such an arrangement. Annoyed, Adelina glanced at Lancelot and asked him to explain. Lancelot said that Adelina had been wanting to broaden her horizons for some time, and since Masaru understood how dangerous it was for a woman to travel alone, he thought it best for her to accompany him. Masaru realized that Lancelot was pushing Adelina onto him. Still, he thought that now that the beast folk had been freed, he could use all the help he could get in developing the village. However, he commented that bringing a city-raised girl to a rural village might be a bit awkward. Adelina told him not to worry, saying she could sleep anywhere, and more importantly, she found him to be an interesting person. Moving closer, she smiled, and Masaru laughed, saying she truly had Lancelot's blood in her and would probably follow him no matter what he said. He added that if she was tagging along to help him, he had no complaints. But since she might not return for several years, she should be prepared. Surprised, Adelina asked what he meant by a few years. Lancelot also interrupted, asking for clarification. Masaru explained that he planned to develop the village into a proper city where the beast folk could live safely, and that such a task would reasonably take years. Hearing this, Lancelot grew worried about Adelina, but she firmly told him not to try to stop her. She warned that if he told her not to go, she would cut ties with him. Shocked, Lancelot said there was no helping it and told Masaru he was counting on him, warning him not to lay a single finger on her. Seeing Adelina's worried expression, Masaru smiled and said it might not be such a bad thing before it was too late for her. Then, thanking Lancelot for his hospitality, he said that he would return someday, whether when life became peaceful or when they ran into trouble, and that they would surely meet again in the future. Masaru and Adelina then left, with Masaru thinking that things had taken a bit longer than expected. Along the way, he managed to solve the rabbit folks' problems and gathered plenty of materials with Adelina's help. They continued their journey, and Masaru eventually formed several strong alliances. When he returned to meet the rabbit folk, he quickly explained everything to them, noting there was still much to plan and discuss. Upon seeing him, May rushed forward and hugged him emotionally, while Masaru simply wanted to enjoy that moment to the fullest. When the chief learned everything from Masaru, he was astonished. They had believed Masaru had only gone to gather resources for them, but he had accomplished far more than that. Adelina commented that her muscle-brained uncle could learn a thing or two from Masaru. The chief finally understood Masaru's intentions. If they intended to take a different stance from their country and cooperate with him instead, then they would set aside their resentment and welcome his help. However, he still had some concerns, especially about the technology Masaru had taught them. He worried that their people might develop too quickly and eventually start another war. Masaru reassured him not to worry, explaining that he had already spoken directly with the commander and secured a peace treaty. Therefore, they should focus on preparing to welcome the freed beast folk. To do that, they would need to expand the village, so Masaru proposed creating a new city, the city of the beast folk. The next morning, Adelina and May were trying to wake Masaru up. Adelina reminded him that he was the one who had said everyone should gather because he had something important to discuss. May agreed, teasing that Masaru was supposed to be the one most alert in the mornings. Still half asleep, Masaru yawned and said it was probably because he had been overworking himself, and when he finally rested, he tended to sleep deeply. Adelina and May decided to go ahead, telling him to hurry up and join them soon. Just then, a glowing screen appeared before Masaru, showing a new message. It was from Era Saphira, the younger sister of Victinius. She wrote that after receiving the reports indicating signs of civilization's advancement, the gods of Alstetia had agreed to reward him by raising his skills. They expressed hope that Masaru would continue to live peacefully among the people. Masaru was surprised. It seemed that the world didn't have just one god, and apparently, a goddess with some common sense had finally shown up. Since he was being rewarded for development, he figured that if he kept making progress, he might be contacted again. If he could gain skills like this, then staying motivated wouldn't be a problem at all. While he was reading, Adelina's voice echoed from outside, shouting for him to come out. Masaru hurriedly joined everyone and apologized for keeping them waiting. He explained that he had gathered them to discuss the village's future. Many of them had probably already heard from the chief that the beast folk who had been enslaved were now free. However, a major problem still remained. The number of freed beast folk was around 200, which meant the village's population would triple once they arrived. To accommodate them, they would need to drastically improve food production and strengthen defenses. Masaru suggested building more defensive walls, setting up temporary tents, and, in a nearby location, constructing an entirely new city. Everyone stared at him in surprise as he continued, saying he had already spoken to the chief, who had shown him a suitable area for development. Still, some wondered whether such a city could truly be built, and what kind of city Masaru had in mind. Masaru replied that he would do his utmost to support them, and envisioned a city that would be safe, inclusive, and filled with smiles, a true city of the beast folk. Hearing that, everyone became enthusiastic and ready to begin, convinced more than ever that Masaru was someone they could trust. Then, Masaru added one more thing. He admitted that he had never properly shared his story with the people who trusted him so much and felt it was insincere of him not to do so. Everyone paused, realizing that, indeed, they didn't know much about him. Only that he had appeared one day after getting lost on the roadside and seemed to carry troubles of his own. Out of respect, they had never questioned him further. Finally, Masaru revealed the truth. He had been brought to their world by the gods, from an entirely different world. The moment he said it, silence fell over everyone. As he looked around at their stunned faces, Masaru thought to himself that, as expected, no one was going to believe him. Everyone suddenly grew excited, wondering if Masaru was from another continent and if his knowledge came from the civilization there. They were curious about which god had brought him to their land and whether he had seen that god with his own eyes. Adelina finally understood why Masaru always seemed out of place, and she realized it wasn't just idle curiosity. Masaru said he felt as though people were subtly bad-mouthing him. More importantly, he wondered whether they truly believed him, despite everything he had said. The chief came over and said that they did trust him, especially since Masaru had claimed it was the will of the gods. Adelina agreed, adding that if it truly was the work of the world's creator, it would explain many things. Masaru thought that this must be a world where the existence of gods was taken for granted. The chief went on to say that it was a bit late for Masaru to talk about earning their trust, as anyone who protected them and lived and worked alongside them was already considered family. No one would suspect someone like him. Soon after, the children ran up to Masaru and asked what humans were like, where he came from, and what kind of technology they had. One of them even asked what the gods looked like. Masaru, clearly irritated, told them to be quiet and promised to talk more about himself during dinner. As for the gods, he said he would make a bronze statue to show them next time. Then, they mentioned that they needed to begin the village expansion plan. Masaru told them to follow the chief's instructions to set up the temporary tents first. He said he would speak with the collection team about the wood later and asked them to come see him afterward. Turning to Adelina and May, Masaru said there was something important for them to do. They were going to help him make slaked lime. May raised her hand and asked what that was, and Adelina also looked confused. Masaru explained that they would be using it to build the city, which was their secret plan. That was why he was entrusting the task to them, his most trusted people. Adelina found the idea fascinating and asked if it was difficult. Masaru replied that it wasn't hard, just a bit tedious. Masaru took both of them near an iron pot and told them that they could make slaked lime using that furnace. First, they had to put seashells into the pot, and then add wood or fuel beneath it to light the furnace. He pointed to a box next to the furnace and explained that it was the bellows. By pushing and pulling its handle, it would blow air through the hole, supplying fresh air continuously while the fire burned. May found it troublesome and asked what would happen next. Masaru replied that the air would pass through the tube and go directly into the furnace, allowing the temperature to reach around 1,000 degrees. Since they couldn't quite grasp how hot that was, he explained that water boils at around 100 degrees. Iron glows red and becomes malleable at about 1,000 degrees and melts between 1,200 and 1,500 degrees depending on the type of iron. Adelina then asked how he managed to measure all of that. Masaru admitted that it was a very good question, but even he didn't know the exact answer. He added that while understanding and explaining the theory was important, what truly mattered was safety and knowing the proper way to use things. When Adelina said she understood the safety part but didn't know what he meant by proper use, Masaru explained that by proper, he meant whether one could actually reproduce in real life what they imagined in theory. The correct way to use something varied greatly, depending on the technology and the ingenuity of the person using it. He went on to say that the results always depended on the technology being applied, and that technology brought both benefits and responsibilities. As long as they lived, he said, they had to keep thinking carefully about how they used it. He told both of them to always think carefully about how they used technology, saying that doing so would help them succeed. And even when they failed, it would still lead to growth. When May asked if failing was really okay, Masaru patted both of their heads and said that rather than learning without ever making mistakes, It was through failure that they could reflect and discover the right way to do things. If they could look back on their past selves and use that understanding to move forward, he added, that was what truly mattered. Then he told them to start heating the furnace. He let them handle the work on their own, thinking they seemed to be doing well, and went off to take care of his own tasks. The chief had asked him to find a good location to start building the city, so Masaru set out early to begin leveling the area. When he reached the spot, he inspected it and began cleaning the ground, thinking to himself that the skills he had obtained from the slot machine were both cheap and frighteningly effective. His level and abilities had increased since the last time he was there, but something about the place felt different, as if an epic battle had once taken place there, leaving the area unnaturally cleared. The location the chief had suggested was relatively flat, situated on high ground, and seemed ideal for construction. The land was solid bedrock, making it a strong foundation. Masaru decided not to ask the rabbit folk for help, believing it was something he could handle using his own processing skills. Still, he wondered whether it was truly possible. After a moment of thought, he decided there was no harm in trying. The flat area that resulted was entirely due to his experience in Putariem, and it took about 6 hours for his magic to fully recover. He had planned to gradually level and expand the area, but looking at it now, he realized that clearing the necessary land could be done by himself within just a few days. The thought made him uneasy. At that pace, he could work non-stop for 2 whole days and the project would still stay on track. He began wondering if there was anything else that needed to be done when his eyes suddenly caught sight of the cliffs to the north. Then it hit him. How could he have forgotten? He quickly rushed toward the cliffs, remembering something he had wanted and needed ever since he came to this world. Finding it had always been one of his top priorities. When he reached the area and checked beneath the cliffs, he finally found what he had been looking for: slimes. He went to the chief, who wondered how Masaru had been helping them every day to improve the village, for which they were deeply grateful. Even now, Masaru was assisting them in building the city, and the chief could only trust in his actions. Masaru felt confused because the people seemed scared when he brought the slime. He mentioned that he would be raising it in the village for a while and asked everyone to get along with it. However, as soon as they heard that, everyone started running away, wondering if Masaru was really sure about his decision since slimes were magical beasts. Masaru explained his plan. He intended to use them for garbage disposal and cleaning purposes in the future. At the moment, it was behaving well and not attacking anyone. He wanted to research it further and learn more about its nature. During his time in Putariem, he had read that some magical beasts were not hostile toward humans and could even coexist with them. In other words, magical beasts could be treated as resources, just like wood or stone. They asked if he wanted to verify that himself, and Masaru thought that he wanted to make a toilet first. He then agreed with their words. The chief mentioned that he had never thought about using magical beasts in that way before. Masaru had said earlier that he wanted to try something, and the chief asked if he meant testing the slime as a way to dispose of waste. Masaru agreed, adding that he wanted to see what it could digest as food and also needed to confirm what it was weak against so that they could control it in the future. He added that he wanted to capture and raise the monitor lizards found in that area, explaining that if they started a farm, it could help improve their food situation as well. The first step toward that goal was raising the slimes. He then asked what the chief thought about it. The chief understood and said he would inform everyone in the village. Masaru thanked him for that. The slime research diary written by Masaru stated that the slimes were about 60 centimeters in size, shaped like a manju, and translucent green in color. They were unable to climb higher than their own height, and if the foothold they used to climb was less than 2/3 of the area of the ground they were on, they would simply slide back down. In one of his experiments, Masaru gave the slime garbage such as leaves and wood. The slime absorbed them and slowly digested them over a few days. Although it didn't seem to particularly like leaves and wood, it eventually digested them, showing that it would likely have no problem handling human waste. Encouraged by this result, Masaru continued his observations. After a few days, an incident occurred where the slime suddenly hardened and shrank, which confused him at first. He soon realized it had dried out, learning that slimes were weak to dehydration. Further experiments revealed that they were also weak to fire and seawater. Having discovered ways to keep them under control, it became easier for him to recruit volunteers to help raise them. Through his research, Masaru formed a hypothesis that slimes might be part of the world's natural self-cleaning mechanism. He observed that when a slime was placed in dirty water, it absorbed the impurities and left the water clean. This discovery filled him with joy, as he realized how much of the world's knowledge still remained undiscovered. As he continued his work, he stood beneath a may tree, taking care of a slime, and felt pleased that the villagers no longer objected to the slimes. They were becoming increasingly popular, and more people had begun raising them. However, Masaru still felt it necessary to remind everyone that magical creatures could be dangerous. When May asked if she could pet one, he refused, explaining that slimes were not pets. Feeling tired and drowsy, Masaru's eyes grew heavy with sleep. After he later spoke with the chief wondered if Masaru was truly serious. Masaru was confused by his question, and the chief clarified that while everyone was already busy with their own work and the slime project, he was amazed that Masaru still planned to leave again to gather resources. Adelina mentioned that while Masaru might seem strange, she was sure he had a proper reason that would become clear eventually. Masaru explained that he didn't think they had enough materials yet, and with the city's future management in mind, he wanted to preserve as much of the surrounding area as possible. The chief understood Masaru's concern, admitted he hadn't considered that, and decided to leave the matter in Masaru's hands. The chief continued, saying they would do anything they could to help Masaru. Masaru thanked him and mentioned that he happened to have a request for the gathering team. He would like them to help collect tree seeds and saplings. Adelina wondered what Masaru planned to do with them. Masaru explained that he intended to plant them, noting that while it took months or even years for trees to grow, they could be cut down in a moment. Planting saplings in advance was a way of preparing for the future. In the world he came from, this was known as tree planting. By helping the mountains and forests, they could gather the wood they needed while still maintaining a rich environment. He added that this was knowledge he had learned from working at the home center and not because he was specially trained in saplings or fertilizers. The chief asked how many saplings he planned to plant and how many they would need. Masaru replied that he would leave that to everyone's judgment and experience, suggesting they gather a variety of fruit and seed-bearing plants. They would grow the saplings in the village until they reached waist height before moving them to the mountains. The chief then asked when he planned to start gathering. Masaru said he would leave once preparations were complete, but he would not be bringing anyone along at that time. Adelina immediately said she would tag along, and May decided to join them the next morning. Masaru asked May if she had forgotten what he had told her, to which she replied that it had only been 3 days and she already knew a lot about the grass and other plants. Masaru thought it might be better for Adelina, who had just arrived, to stay behind. Adelina, however, insisted that this was the perfect chance to see new things and expand her horizons. Masaru wondered if he should refuse, but Adelina hugged May and said there was no reason for them not to go. They didn't have other plans for the next few days. Masaru, surprised, said he had no choice but to let them come, and emphasized that they should follow his instructions later. The three of them set out for the first day of scouting, already at some distance from the village. Adelina asked if they were only gathering wood. Masaru explained that they would also collect stones, and since he had just spoken to the chief about tree planting, they could gather seeds and saplings of edible and medicinal plants while nearby. Adelina followed along, and May, excited, asked if the plants would really grow large. Masaru agreed and reminded them that, since they were living in the forest, they needed to be careful of wild plants and animals, emphasizing that cohabitation was the first priority. Adelina commented that Masaru sometimes explained things in a complicated way. Masaru explained that, in his old world, civilization had grown so much that many species went extinct. He suggested that humans having so much power might have been harmful to the world. He continued, explaining that this was why he wanted them to live in harmony with the world, adding that all living things were God's beloved children, or something like that, and admitted that he might have been trying a little too hard to sound cool. Masaru was suddenly hit by a small stone thrown by Adelina, which startled him. She said that if a person who had met God directly claimed something, everyone would believe it. May suggested that they start gathering the materials. Adelina hoped they would find some interesting things, and Masaru agreed to rest for a while. By the time they had collected a large number of logs. Adelina wondered where Masaru was, as it was almost time to start storing the gathered materials. May mentioned that Masaru had left a while ago. Adelina became worried, wondering how far he had gone. May said that she had gathered many plants and thought she should go call Masaru. May then listened carefully and heard the sound of a sword. Adelina was surprised and remarked on how convenient the ears of the rabbit folk were, then asked if Masaru was currently fighting. They both went forward and saw Masaru using his sword to cut something. The object was flying toward Adelina, so Masaru warned her to just catch it. Adelina was frightened, but the object landed in her hands. She screamed, wondering what Masaru was making her catch. Masaru apologized, saying he had assumed it was something she would naturally dodge. She replied that he would not get off so easily next time. Masaru added that a dangerous-looking magical beast had appeared, and he had only tried to chase it away when it attacked him. May noticed that it was a giant whirl, and explained that it normally lived underground, feeding on insects and other small creatures. Masaru realized that this explained why the plants there flourished. Similar creatures in his world enriched the soil and helped plants grow abundantly. Adelina was confused, and Masaru explained that he had not seen any openings where the creature had entered or exited the ground. Adelina replied that if she remembered correctly, these worms were skilled in earth magic, shifting the soil as they moved, which is why they left no holes. Masaru was shocked to hear this. He then understood that the material from the worms could be used to make bowstrings, and that it was highly valued in Puteriem. May asked how it was used, and Adelina explained that the warm muscle of the worms was elastic and durable, suitable for making bowstrings, leather armor, and other items. Masaru noted that it was an unexpectedly useful material. Adelina added that people even came to that area specifically to hunt them. Adelina mentioned that the material fetched a good price, and in the first place, not many people could defeat a worm so easily. The three of them looked at each other, and May commented that it was no surprise since it was Masaru who had done it. Masaru said it might be a good idea to include hunting magical beasts that could be turned into useful materials as an extra activity on their list. May mentioned that if it was a useful magical beast, they usually hunted monitor lizards and guinea fowl for food. Masaru thought those might taste delicious, and May told him to wait for a while as she would go find some, saying their sounds were quite distinctive, so she should be able to locate them easily. Suddenly, a giant beast appeared nearby and let out a loud growl. The sound struck May's sensitive ears, making her scream and fall to her knees in pain. Masaru and Adelina were startled and rushed to her, wondering what had happened. May began to cry, and Masaru thought it reminded him of the day he first met her when they encountered the goblin. However, the fear on her face now seemed far worse, so he decided to check what was going on. Adelina stopped him, saying that even though she knew he was strong, he would surely die if he went, and she begged him not to start a fight. Masaru stopped and assured her that he wasn't going to fight, but at least wanted to confirm what they were dealing with since it was in the same area. Adelina made him promise to come back right away, and he agreed before asking her for the direction. She pointed the way, and Masaru left, only to find the giant monsters and beasts ahead, leaving him completely shocked. Being frightened, Masaru hid behind a tree. Once he noticed that the beast had left, he let out a long breath of relief, realizing that he was safe. He thought it was a bear, though he had never seen anything like it before. At a glance, it appeared to be around 4 meters tall with 4 limbs, and it didn't resemble any magical beast he had ever encountered. He wondered if the creatures had been fighting over territory. The horse nearby looked unusual as well. It had 6 legs and was enormous. He decided to use his appraisal skill to see if he could learn more about it. From the results, he discovered that it was called an assault savanna horse. Reading its description, he began to think about magicules, the particles that served as the source of magical energy in that world. However, the real concern was the huge bear-like creature that had killed and eaten the strange horse. What puzzled him was why the beast had suddenly left. Then, he noticed that it had started raining. He figured that the others would probably have to stop their gathering for the day, and he needed to return to Adelina and May to report everything to the chief. Later, during training, when they explained everything to the chief, he told them that the creature was known as the demon bear. Masaru mentioned the horse he had seen, and the chief confirmed that it was a mutated species caused by magicules. He added that back when they lived in the coastal town, such creatures appeared once every 5 years, and no one could even fight them. All they could do was endure, as those beasts were terrifying, akin to natural disasters. Masaru remarked that it seemed like a good thing he had listened to May's advice. The chief agreed, saying that they were lucky this time, as the demon bear's hunger must have been satisfied and that it usually left when it sensed rain approaching. Adelina asked what would happen if the demon bear came near their village. The chief told her to calm down, explaining that they were safe for now. The rain was a signal for the start of the rainy season, and around this time every year, they typically experience 2 weeks of continuous rainfall. During that period, the plains flooded, with water rising from their ankles up to their knees, and the forests and fields would merge into what looked like a single vast lake. The chief continued that even the demon bear wouldn't be able to move freely under such conditions, and if they made sufficient preparations during that time, there wouldn't be any problem. He appeared calm because he already knew about it, and with enough time, they could strengthen their defenses and set up traps as well. Masaru, however, felt uneasy at the thought of the forest and fields turning into a vast lake. He stood up, pointing out that this would also change the areas where animals lived. The chief agreed, wondering why Masaru had suddenly asked something like that. As Masaru turned to leave, the chief added that aquatic creatures would spread everywhere and then asked where Masaru was going. Masaru apologized to everyone. He understood that the demon bear was a serious concern, but he simply couldn't take it anymore. The chief, confused, wondered if Masaru was planning to fight the creature on his own. Masaru shouted that it wasn't about the bear, it was about food. All they had in the village was meat, and he desperately wanted to eat something different for a change. It was pure torture for his Japanese taste buds. He pleaded for just 1 day and, saying that, ran off before anyone could stop him. Adelina commented that she was already used to his impulsive behavior, and May added that Masaru really acted fast, As Masaru ran through the area, he noticed that some parts of the land were already turning into lakes. Excitement filled him. No one else was around, and the water-covered world felt like his alone. Determined to make the most of it, he decided to see what he could do. Suddenly, he slipped and felt something grab his leg. Turning to look, he saw a crab clinging to his foot. He quickly pulled out a rope from his item box, tied it, and successfully captured the large crab. His excitement grew as he examined it and discovered that it was a forest green gazami. The entire area seemed full of valuable catches, and he decided to go after anything that looked edible. Before long, he had captured a large number of creatures, piling them into a massive heap. Laughing, he said goodbye to the days of an unbalanced diet, certain that everyone in the village would be astonished when they saw it. Suddenly, Victinius appeared and asked what he was doing out there alone, mumbling to himself. Masaru was startled by her sudden appearance. She teased him, asking why he was still so easily surprised by that. He replied that he doubted he would ever get used to it, then asked why she had come out when it was pouring so heavily. Victinius said it wasn't bad at all. With her divine barrier, she couldn't even get wet. Masaru was astonished and couldn't help but wish he had one too. Changing the topic, he asked why she had really come there. Victinius replied that there wasn't any special reason. She was simply curious about what he was doing and what he planned to do with all the crabs and other things he had caught. Masaru wondered if it could be that Victinius had never eaten anything since becoming a goddess. He felt an urge to tease her a little, but admitted to himself that she had a good eye. Anyone who saw the food he had prepared would naturally be curious. Victinius asked if the food was really that good, and Masaru agreed. Grinning, he took her hand and said that since it was just the two of them, they should treat themselves for once. After some time, he finished setting up a temporary base, and Victinius admired how well built it was for something made so quickly. Masaru told her that she had seemed interested earlier, so it was time to eat some crab. She looked surprised, wondering if they were really going to eat it just like that. Masaru denied it, explaining that they had to boil it first. It wasn't a complicated dish, but it was delicious. He asked her to sit and wait while he prepared it. Victinius watched as he began boiling the crab. Suddenly, she took out a cloth and started rubbing his hair to dry it. Masaru was taken aback, and when he tried to move, she told him to stop making it difficult. He pointed out that he could tell she was drying his hair, but asked if that was really her usual personality. Victinius found that rude and told him to shut up and focus on watching the fire. She added that she was simply being selfish. It was her way of acknowledging that he had been working hard for the village and the coastal town. Masaru nodded quietly, and she continued drying his hair. Once the crab was done, he served it, and Victinius admitted that it looked even better than she had expected. Masaru agreed, though he thought to himself that the atmosphere had turned awkward after Victinius's sudden gesture. When she tried to eat it, Victinius complained that the shell was too hard. Masaru smiled and told her there was a trick to it. He cracked open the shell and handed it to her, telling her to try it that way. When Victinius tasted it, her eyes widened in surprise. She said it was delicious, with a perfect balance of rich umami and gentle sweetness. She continued eating enthusiastically, and Masaru joked that he had better start eating before she finished everything. Victinius told him to shut up again, but added that she wanted seconds. After the meal, she thanked him, saying it was the first time she had ever eaten such a meal with meat prepared that way. Masaru replied that he was glad she enjoyed it and mentioned that there was still some left over. Hearing that, Victinius asked if she could bring some back for her sister. Masaru remembered her sister, the one who had written him a message before, and commented that she seemed to have much more common sense than someone he happened to know. Victinius was taken aback and said that last remark was unnecessary. Masaru chuckled and said she could take some back if she wanted, though it wouldn't taste as good once it got cold. Victinius replied that it would be fine if she stored it in her item box. She added that Masaru was really amazing. He could make so many things, food, tools, even swords, and that she never got bored watching him work. Masaru wondered what Victinius was even talking about, since she was the one who had granted him those skills in the first place. Victinius replied that wasn't what she meant. The skills themselves were just tools. They wouldn't help him create anything unless he already had the knowledge and imagination to use them properly. Those, she explained, were merely the most basic of basics. Masaru understood what she meant. He knew how to make things because he used to work at a home center back in the countryside, where he had practically been a handyman. He told her that home centers in rural areas were huge buildings that took up massive plots of land and stayed open from early morning until late at night. They sold everything, from flowers and plants to farming supplies. During planting season, he and his co-workers even collaborated with local farmers, opening the store earlier than usual to make shopping easier for them. Masaru had studied how to handle various flowers, trees, and vegetable seeds, and how to stock different saplings throughout the year. He also learned to build and dismantle coops and sheds, lay bricks and pavements, and handle tasks ranging from woodworking to electronics. He even dealt with pet food, sanitary goods, bedding, and diapers. Because he had worked with so many different products, he had learned a great deal about how they functioned. He added that all that knowledge would have been useless if he couldn't explain it to others, so he always had to teach customers how to use what they bought. He recalled that as soon as he learned something new, they were short-staffed again, and his lazy manager never lifted a finger to help. Instead, the manager would just tell him to study another new product, completely unaware of the chaos in the store at the time. Remembering those days, Masaru felt emotional and almost started crying. Victinius told him that everything had worked out in the end, and that she was sure the people in this new world were living well thanks to his help. She even mentioned hearing about the statue of her that he had made. Masaru felt a bit awkward, wondering how she had found out about that. Still, he said they needed to focus on dealing with the demon bear, or else it would make for a very unpleasant welcome for the beast folk who had just moved into the new city. Masaru felt relaxed, knowing that he had originally come there on a hunting spree, yet somehow ended up running away just thinking about that bear. Victinius was astonished, refusing to acknowledge such behavior. Masaru looked puzzled, and she explained that he had come all the way to this new world and accomplished so many incredible things. She couldn't bear the thought of him acting weak. Masaru smirked and teased that drinking it up wasn't fair, then asked what she would do if he actually decided to run off. Victinius replied firmly that she wouldn't forgive him if he did. Taking it as part of their playful banter, Masaru wondered aloud what she was even saying, calling her a useless goddess. Victinius was completely shocked to hear that. Masaru then added with a grin that if even a goddess was saying such things, then he supposed he couldn't keep sitting around being lame forever. Masaru went to the village to oversee the construction of the wall, which they were planning to make thicker. Someone asked if they just needed to mix lime with seawater and dirt. However, they didn't have enough anti-beast stakes, so more were being brought over. A worker informed Masaru that they were almost done with the wall near the entrance, and things were progressing smoothly. Masaru noted that they seemed to have built the lookout post as well, so they wouldn't need to worry about attacks from the smaller creatures anymore. The person added that they were also planning to build platforms alongside the lookout post for the archers to fire from. Masaru looked at the barrier and told them to continue their work, wondering how the other areas were coming along. The person replied that the traps outside the town were being set up smoothly, and that they could clear out some troublesome areas to gather more stone materials. Masaru thought that since the rainy season had brought them plenty of resources, their demon bear countermeasures were progressing well. Although he wanted some time to train and level up on his own, he was satisfied with focusing on strengthening the village's defenses. Later, as night fell, he checked his stats while eating and noticed that he seemed to have gained a new skill without realizing it. It wasn't a combat-related ability, but he still needed more firepower. Just then, May approached him and asked if he needed fire magic. He thanked her for her hard work throughout the day and explained that what he needed was slightly different from regular fire magic. He wondered whether any of the rabbit folk could use fire magic, but May denied it, saying that perhaps some of the fox people might be able to. Masaru then thought about asking Lancelot to send the fox people first. Nusa mentioned that she didn't think any beast folk could use magic. From what she had heard, beast folk possessed exceptional physical abilities but very little magical aptitude. Masaru thought that he hadn't seen any of the rabbit folk use magic. In fact, he hadn't seen any magic at all since arriving in that world. He called Adelina over and asked how many magic users there had been in the city they had visited. Adelina replied that there were about 2 people capable of producing water. Masaru felt disappointed, thinking about that useless goddess Victinius who had promised him a dazzling world of swords and magic. When May noticed his expression, she asked what was wrong. Masaru said it was nothing, but he was thinking about what he would do when he met Victinius again. Just then, he heard a pop-up sound. Checking it, he found a message from Era Saphira, saying she would tell him about the state of magic use in that world. May grew excited, never having seen anything like the glowing screen that appeared in front of Masaru. Adelina, too, watched closely as the words appeared. Masaru was shocked, realizing it was the same kind of message he had received from the goddess before. He explained to them that this screen appeared whenever he received a divine message. The message described the current state of science and magic in the world, how the world was gradually building up its basic knowledge and principles. Although magical beasts could use magic as their specialty, the intelligent races, including humans, elves, dwarves, beastfolk, and demons, had stopped at the observational stage without conducting deeper research into it. The message went on to say that they wanted Masaru to guide the world toward the true path of magic, and that the divine realm looked forward to his efforts in advancing the civilization of that world. Masaru wondered whether the goddess was really asking him to develop magic itself. Adelina asked if he could use any magic, and Masaru replied that he was supposedly able to use healing magic. Both Adelina and May stared at him, and he added that the message seemed less about technology and more about the knowledge that would become the foundation for future magic. Perhaps the goddess wanted him to encourage the people of that world to study and understand it. Mei asked if Masaru knew the principles of magic. Masaru denied it, but said that since he was supposed to teach magic, he could at least establish some facilities to help make its use more widespread. In other words, he should build a school. Mei then asked if that was something from his world. Masaru agreed, explaining that a school was a place where people gained knowledge. Starting from around 6 years old, almost everyone in his world spent 9 years there, learning various subjects, and some continued even longer for higher studies. Adelina understood and explained that this was how technology spread in Masaru's world. Masaru added that the world they were currently in also had its own form of technology. Adelina then asked how different this new world was compared to Masaru's original one. Masaru said it was hard to explain in words, but he had something perfect to show them. He took out his smartphone, which made Mei wonder if it was some kind of item box. Masaru explained that it was actually a device representing the peak of his world's technology. When he tried to switch it on, he realized he had forgotten to charge it, and it wouldn't turn on at all. He wondered if it was because he had stored it in his item box. He knew that food and living things didn't rot inside the box, so he questioned whether time itself might stop in there. Curious, Mei asked what the device could do. Masaru replied that it was an incredible item that allowed people to talk to someone far away. It could also take pictures and videos, play thousands of songs, access the internet, and run games. As he explained, both Adelina and Mei looked utterly confused. Masaru admitted they probably didn't understand most of it and decided to show them instead. Excited, they watched as he took their picture, played some music, performed quick calculations, and even demonstrated a few games. After a while, Masaru grew frustrated with himself, realizing he had gotten too relaxed and ended up fooling around. Later, as he sat alone in his tent, his thoughts returned to magic. Mei had mentioned earlier that education itself wasn't the issue, but Masaru realized he couldn't teach them anything if they didn't have any prior knowledge. He pondered deeply, wondering what he could possibly do when the only magic he could use was healing. Victinius suddenly appeared behind Masaru, saying that it was simple, since he was the one capable of using magic. Then she paused, realizing something, and looked shocked as she accused Masaru of tricking her. Masaru replied that he had only asked because he knew she was probably watching him anyway. What mattered more, however, was that he already knew he could use magic, but the only kind he had ever managed was healing magic. Victinius disagreed, explaining that he had actually used magic once before, during the final part of his duel with Lancelot, though he had probably done it unconsciously. At that time, he had reinforced his sword with magic. Masaru was surprised and asked if he hadn't done the same thing back in the mountains when he fought the bandits. Victinius shook her head, saying that what he had used then were merely his skills. She went on to explain that the skills granted in the realm of the gods took the form of the receiver's mental image. In Masaru's case, that image seemed to be strongly influenced by the home improvement center he had worked at in his previous life. Masaru raised his hand and asked whether healing magic in that world worked differently. Victinius replied that it did. He needed medical knowledge to use it properly, and even after activation, the healing process still took time. Masaru admitted he had always found the skill slots he received to be strange, since they were all oddly convenient and tailored specifically to him. He finally understood what she meant and asked what he should do to use magic again, like he had during the duel. Victinius told him that he already knew the sensation of magical energy flowing through his body during skill activation. Masaru nodded, saying he had even drained his magic completely once. Victinius continued, explaining that he should think of magic as both the fuel and the energy source. He needed to visualize it flowing within him, understand how that flow began, how it moved, how to strengthen it, and how to release it. Those, she said, were the basic principles of using magic. Masaru gave a thumbs up and said he would give it a try, adding that Victinius could also give it a go if she wanted. Annoyed, Victinius snapped that she had already done enough. Masaru asked if that was really fine. Didn't it count as interference? But she replied that it was fine, and it wasn't like she was scared of being scolded by Hera or anything like that. Masaru began to wonder if Victinius was actually concerned about him, but was just trying to play it off. Irritated by his expression, Victinius punched him and warned him not to get so full of himself, saying she had her own reasons. She explained that, at the very least, she wanted to help because her younger sister was the goddess of magic, and as the older sister, she felt responsible. Masaru quickly told her to wait. He wasn't complaining about her help. He was just praising her for stepping up as an older sister. After hearing that, Victinius left. Seeing that unexpected, softer side of her, Masaru began his daily research on magic with renewed focus. Meanwhile, the village's demon bear countermeasures were finally completed, and everyone returned to their normal, peaceful routine. One day, Masaru grew tired from waiting since the demon bear hadn't appeared. Adelina mentioned that it was actually a good thing the bear hadn't come. Masaru replied that they still needed to take it down eventually because it could return the following year. Adelina understood, and May added that for the time being the village was safe. The chief agreed, saying that even the arrows Masaru had made could now be used for hunting. Adelina was surprised to learn that Masaru had made arrows too. Masaru explained that he had added backward-facing barbs, making the arrows extremely hard to remove once they pierced a target. When poison was applied to the tips, they became several times more effective. Pleased with his own work, Masaru proudly said that once those arrows hit, they couldn't be pulled out while the poison spread through the prey's body. Adelina commented that the weapons Masaru made were really merciless. Masaru looked shocked and said such things were necessary when fighting for their lives. The chief shifted the topic, mentioning that the hunting team had been praising both the bows and arrows Masaru had made. Masaru went to check on their practice and asked about the bow he had crafted from Trant wood. He also asked about the warm-colored bow he'd made, saying its power was on a completely different level from the Trant bows and that it must have felt great to use. Everyone looked at him with awkward expressions, until one person admitted that the bowstring was far too stiff. Even their strongest hunter could barely draw it, and it was a shame that none of them had been able to use it properly. Masaru was surprised, thinking it must be because their stats weren't high enough. The same person, still struggling, asked Masaru to show them how to shoot it one more time. Masaru agreed, took the bow and arrow, and reminded them that the technique was exactly as he had taught before. When he shot, the arrow flew with tremendous force. The man exclaimed that it didn't just destroy the target, it pierced straight through and even hit a tree behind it. Masaru realized that he must have unconsciously reinforced the arrow with magic due to his recent training. He assumed that the arrow would eventually stop when it hit something solid. However, it didn't. It soared so far that they saw a distant tree collapse, and some villagers reported seeing something strange happening in the forest. Moments later, an alarm bell rang throughout the village. There was an emergency. Near the northern cliff, demon bears were approaching. Everyone began to panic, shouting that the demon bear was coming from the northern cliff as they rushed to gather together. Masaru was startled, insisting that it was just a coincidence and not his fault. But the roar echoing from the distance sounded disturbingly familiar. The chief said that this was exactly what they had been preparing for all along. If the bear had been living near the northern cliff, it would have reached the village sooner or later, so it was better that they faced it now while they were ready. He then asked if Masaru could handle it. Masaru nodded and told the chief to contact Adelina and May to begin the evacuation and to gather everyone capable of fighting at the defensive wall. He ordered the hunting team to come with him, saying that he would take the lead as planned, and urged them to hurry toward where the bear was spotted. Just then, Adelina and May arrived. Masaru gently patted their heads and told them he was leaving the safety of the village in their hands. With a determined look, he declared that they were heading out for the peace and protection of the village, and that this would be their first demon bear hunt. With that, Masaru and the hunting team set off toward the northern cliff. Adelina and May were standing together when Adelina reassured her that everything would be fine and that Masaru would return safely. She noticed that May was deeply lost in thought, so she called out to her. May replied that it was nothing, and said she also had faith in Masaru, hoping he would do his best. Masaru observed the giant four-armed bear and thought it looked furious. His assumption turned out to be right, though he realized it only after an arrow struck the creature's eye. He then looked toward the archers he had brought, seeing them taking their positions along the cliffs. He understood that their strategy was simple: lure the bear to the trap zone specifically prepared for the demon bear, while the hunting squad provided cover fire from above using the bows he had crafted. Masaru's role was to act as the bait, drawing the bear into the trap. He knew that failure would mean his death and the destruction of the village, making this a battle they could not afford to lose. Once ready, he allowed the bear to charge at him, noticing that its wounds were shallow. The real battle was about to begin, a life-or-death chase. He urged the bear to follow him, but it suddenly came dangerously close, shocking him and forcing him to fight back. In the midst of this, he became confused and wondered what was happening. He questioned whether the bear had been affected by the earlier volley of arrows, but it didn't seem that way. He suspected it might be the poison from the ground poison toad he had captured during the rainy season, which he had applied to several arrows for the hunting squad. Because of the poison's unique traits, its effects varied based on the target. He had expected it to have only a minor effect, but it clearly did much more. The squad continued firing arrows until the bear finally collapsed with a scream. They cheered, overjoyed that they had managed to kill it. Masaru checked the amount of experience he had gained and realized he had truly defeated the demon bear. The hunting squad told him they would come to meet him so they could share the news and celebrate. Masaru agreed, saying they should clear the traps and return quickly. He felt truly grateful to God, believing they could finally live there with peace of mind. Masaru looked at the bear and sensed something unusual, so he told the rabbit folk not to come any closer, saying it was not the same bear they had seen earlier. Suddenly, another one appeared behind him and threw a punch that sent him flying, cutting through a tree as it went after him. He was completely confused, wondering if there were actually two demon bears, and his side hurt terribly. He then noticed a massive wound on the bear's head. As the bear kept attacking, Masaru tried to dodge. The others shot arrows, but the bear blocked them, leaving everyone shocked. It roared at them and charged in their direction, prompting them to regroup and prepare another volley. As it moved toward them, Masaru fired an arrow that pierced its arm. He wondered whether the bear was attempting to escape while still fighting him. One of the hunters called out to Masaru, saying he was being reckless and asking what he thought he could accomplish with such serious injuries, urging him to escape before he was killed. Masaru tried to get up while the bear roared. He knew he still had its attention and that he could still move his body, which meant he still had a chance. The bear began to run at him again, and Masaru thought about the remaining traps, believing he still had some advantage. He decided to run toward that area, hoping he could reach it in time. The monster blocked his path repeatedly, and Masaru was struck again. He leaned against a tree to sit down and realized the trap zone was still about 100 meters away. He had been using healing continuously, but the recovery was slow, and he thought that if he had even a minute to concentrate on healing, he might stand a chance. He felt as if it were all over. Even though he had finally met the friends he wanted to help and had found people he genuinely cared for and worried about, he believed this was the end. Badly injured, he thought apologetically about everyone he might disappoint. At that moment, he heard a voice asking whether he was really planning to give up, so easily, saying it would be far too boring if he did. He saw Adelina arriving with a giant sword, slashing at the bear. She remarked that for someone who could defeat that, Masaru seemed surprisingly weak, or perhaps it was just a meddlesome attempt to broaden his horizons. If that was the case, she said she didn't mind interfering in the fight. Masaru wondered why Adelina was even there. She said he should thank her first, explaining that she had gone out of her way to save him. She added that she didn't intend to take all the credit and that he should actually thank May, because it was thanks to her that Adelina was able to arrive in time. The moment reminded him of when he had left to chase the demon bear. May had told Adelina she had faith in Masaru as well. After some time, Adelina reached May's level and asked her to freely share what she had on her mind. May explained that they had always been treated like children and told what to do, but she believed their relationship with Masaru wasn't one where he got to order them around. Even if that was only her imagination, she felt such a misunderstanding wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Adelina commented that Masaru himself always said there was nothing wrong with misunderstandings. Worried, May then admitted she had heard two roars earlier, one of them mixed with the loud roar of the giant bear. She had thought she was imagining it, but it turned out to be real, and the thought frightened her. That was why she had begged Adelina to go help Masaru. After hearing everything, Masaru said thanking Adelina alone wouldn't be enough, and he owed May greatly. Adelina told him they should focus on getting out of there alive first. She said it was shocking that despite attacking its vital point, the bear was still standing. Masaru, stunned, warned Adelina that she would die if she stayed to help him. She told him to stop joking, asking if he really believed a young maiden like her would come to such a dangerous place without any backup. At that moment, numerous bunny folk appeared from all sides and charged at the bear with spears. Masaru was astonished, and Adelina said everyone had listened to May and decided to help, proving themselves to be excellent companions. Masaru became emotional as they continued advancing instead of retreating. Bill was leading the bear toward the cliff, beneath which lay the trap designed to kill the demon bear. Only a few meters remained. They kept pushing forward when suddenly an attack was about to strike Adelina. Masaru rushed in just in time to block it, praised everyone for their efforts, and told them to leave the rest to him. He thought that because of the time everyone had bought for him, he had finally healed enough to move his body again. He reminded himself that he was no longer alone and felt grateful that everyone had come for him. Now he was able to launch his ultimate attack on the bear. The bear charged at him, but Masaru suddenly locked himself in place and leapt toward its open mouth. With his weapon in hand, he jumped and struck its face. As he did, he nearly fell into the trap below, but at the last moment he threw his weapon toward the giant bow and arrow mechanism. It triggered the mechanism, causing the ground to collapse and sending both him and the bear falling into the trap. He thought the bear had its own life to live, just as they all did, and they wanted to continue moving forward. Because of that, he silently apologized to the bear. The creature finally plunged fully into the trap. Worried, Adelina called out to Masaru and begged him to answer. She then found him lying at a distance, asking why she was acting as if he had died. Relieved, she smiled. then suddenly punched him hard. Masaru wondered why she was doing that when he could actually die from it. She turned away and said it was his fault for making her worry unnecessarily. The others also expressed their relief, saying they had thought he had perished along with the bear. Adelina couldn't believe Masaru had survived by summoning a log while falling. A single piece of wood had not only shielded him from the bear's attack, but had also saved his life. Masaru added that the logs had supported their lives as well, proving quite reliable. He then asked about the bear, and the others confirmed it was no longer breathing. They had finally defeated the demon bear, and this was the second one. Everyone was overjoyed. Suddenly, Masaru collapsed. They checked him and learned he had only fallen asleep from exhaustion. Adelina, annoyed, said it was exactly like him, though she admitted he had worked hard. She then told everyone to head back to the village. As they finally returned while carrying Masaru, he began to wake up. Hera praised Victinius, saying Masaru had done an excellent job. Victinius replied that it was simply the natural outcome and asked whether Hera had finally acknowledged Masaru as the one chosen by the goddess. Hera then wondered aloud whether Victinius had not been losing her composure earlier when Masaru was about to be killed by the demon bear. She said it was unbelievable for a god to shake off all restraint just to help a mortal. And even before the battle, Victinius had descended to meet Masaru and offer him words of encouragement. Hera questioned who the lucky person was to receive such treatment. As Hera stared sharply at her, Victinius turned away and said it wasn't a big deal, insisting she hadn't directly lent him a hand or anything like that. Hera said that Masaru was completely her opposite and that there was nothing wrong with her watching over him. She added that it was not against the gods' codes, but her intentions were now somewhat different from what they had been at the start. When Victinius asked what she meant, Hera told her to simply keep everything in moderation. Victinius then asked what would happen next, now that the bear had been defeated and peace had returned. The city's development plan was finally progressing, and she said she looked forward to the completion of Victinius' statue. Hera remarked that they might as well raise their glasses in celebration of their victory. Victinius agreed that it was a great idea, thinking of the future development of her new world, and the two of them clinked their teacups together. Meanwhile, Masaru was celebrating with the rabbit folk. A few days later, he told everyone that since they had finally defeated the demon bear, they should hurry and start the development plan. Everyone looked shocked, and Sot wondered whether they were simply unprepared. One person replied that they understood the basic idea of the plan, but questioned the issue of land. Sot wondered why they did not already have plenty. Another man came forward and said that although the plan surprised them, he wanted to know what the partitions and lines drawn by Masaru actually meant. Masaru explained that he was beginning construction there, and that he would start by explaining everything on that spot. First, he had drawn the area designated for housing. The white line was the dividing boundary, and the various partitions would serve as the foundations for the houses. When someone asked why they couldn't simply build houses wherever they wanted and requested an explanation for this method, Masaru replied that there were many reasons. He said that in his world, the concept was known as land readjustment. Its purpose was to control the flow of people smoothly, keep noise away from residential areas, and organize houses, workshops, and stores according to their function. It was also effective for dealing with disasters, such as fires and crimes. The chief added that by segregating areas properly, it would be much easier to maintain public security and prevent potential problems. Masaru continued, saying that since they had finally ensured the safety of the slimes, it was time to build underground passageways and sewers. Without proper sewage, he said, the construction of housing in the city would not be allowed. Adelina added that Masaru had already mentioned this during his lecture in the coastal city, and that if she remembered correctly, it involved canals that transported rainwater and waste. Masaru praised her and said that this system was essential for maintaining the city's hygiene. When a person wondered aloud if this meant they would urinate and flush it inside their houses as usual, Masaru yelled that it was absolutely not allowed. If they failed to manage waste properly, he warned, the hygiene of the entire city would collapse, exposing everyone to diseases that could take many lives. Since this was the city where they would build their futures, he said they needed to eliminate all hidden dangers as soon as possible. The people found his explanation terrifying. Masaru said that he shared their concerns and added that he had already marked the location for the first housing site, and all houses would be built within that designated framework. Suddenly, the people asked him to stop, pointing out that the site was only as large as a big tent. Others added that most of their families had 6 members, and questioned why he had not planned something bigger. Masaru told them not to worry, explaining that the houses built in the city would be 2-story stone structures, which would be far more comfortable. The people then asked what exactly a 2-story stone house was. Being excited, they said that Masaru should have told them from the beginning, and that they could hardly believe it, as it felt like a dream. They asked if they were truly going to live in such extravagant houses. Masaru turned to Adelina and asked whether two-story stone houses existed in the coastal or port towns. Adelina explained that most of those buildings were inns or commercial structures, and that no private individual owned a two-story stone house. She added that in the capital, houses were built according to social status. Communal homes were made of wood, straw, and cloth. Merchants and wealthy people lived in larger houses built with bricks, and nobles lived in two-story homes. Masaru then understood why the rabbit folk were so excited. Fired up, they said they wanted to start building immediately. Masaru taught them how to move properly on a construction site. He and a few others had already set up some pillars in advance, and he asked everyone to look carefully. As they observed, one man commented that this was what they would be building next, and that the partitions formed the foundations of the houses. Masaru told them he would give a detailed explanation of the techniques later, but that all of them needed to finish setting the pillars that day. They were surprised, saying they had never seen a construction technique like the one Masaru was demonstrating, and wondered whether it was safe. Masaru agreed that although it was only a wooden framework, the beams had been cut precisely so that they would fit together like a puzzle. He told them to simply remember the procedure and follow the instructions given by the people assisting him. They agreed, saying it seemed simple enough. The chief then asked whether stones would be placed between the pillars. Masaru confirmed this and said that the framework required it, but reminded them to remember something important. May grew excited, wondering aloud whether it involved the material she had helped make earlier. Masaru said he would show them. He explained that it was a mixture of hemp, cooked slaked lime, and sand he had collected from the beach, and that it was called plaster. If they smeared it over the stone walls, he said, the walls would become even more durable. He added that these materials could also be used to make concrete, which was highly effective for building roads. He reminded them that the licked slime truly deserved to be called their secret weapon. Adelina then praised Masaru, saying he possessed an impressive amount of knowledge, and wondered if all of this was connected to his previous work. Masaru explained that he had worked with such materials in his previous job, and since that job had been in the countryside, most of the people he worked with were relatives or friends. He said he had been responsible for delivering materials to craftsmen, which allowed him to accumulate a great deal of knowledge over time. He added that it had not been his main job, but by relying on those skills, he could compensate for his lack of experience in actually producing the materials himself. With the right techniques, he said, he was able to create everything they needed, though there were some things he had done back then that technically went against the law. May became worried, and someone asked whether that meant Masaru had been a bad person. Masaru denied it and placed a hand on May's shoulder, saying that he might have gone overboard at times, but as long as something helped the people around him, it was fine. He then stood up and said he had already given the instructions for measurements and everything else, so he asked everyone to begin while he prepared the rest of the materials. As he turned away, May called out to him, saying they should build a wonderful city. Masaru gave her a thumbs up, and everyone started working. They first constructed the framework and then placed the stones. They continued working, and after a month, the scene shifted to the completed house structure. Masaru felt relieved because everything had gone according to plan. May approached him and mentioned that something had been installed. Masaru said she had arrived at the perfect moment because he had finished his prototype as well. When she asked how they were supposed to use it, he looked at her and said he didn't need to explain it in words. Hearing that, she immediately stepped back, which shocked him, and he asked why she was reacting that way. She called him disgusting, and Masaru said it hurt to hear her phrase it like that. He then stood up and said that if there were no issues, they should start mass-producing the item. Once the installation was complete, he picked up the toilet container and inspected the work. May followed behind him, remarking that the city had grown quite large. Masaru said that the progress was thanks to everyone who had worked hard, but added that they still had a long way to go. Since most of the housing area was complete, he told them they would need to start working on the fields for food, and that regarding industry, they ought to make the best use of the opportunity they had. Suddenly, May called out to him, shouting that he finally understood what she had been trying to tell him. Masaru patted her head and said he would work together with everyone and would not recklessly handle everything alone, just as he had promised. At that moment, someone approached and asked Masaru to come quickly, because something had happened. Masaru wondered if there was a problem. The person said that there was trouble at the gate. Masaru asked whether something had gone wrong with the transportation of materials, but the rabbit folk man denied it and said that humans had been found unconscious near the gate. Masaru was shocked and rushed there immediately. They brought the unconscious humans inside, and Masaru treated their injuries. A few rabbit folk were speaking among themselves, saying that the rumors about collapsed humans were actually true. They wondered whether those people were similar to Masaru, but they soon realized they were different. These strangers wore armor and might have been expelled from the port town. They were identified as Knights of the Gratis Kingdom. The Knights later held a meeting with Masaru, Adelina, and the chief. One of them introduced himself as Fried, a member of the King's Guard from the Gratis Chivalric Order. He said the young man behind him was Distar, and the one still unconscious on the bed was Gold. Fried said he could not thank them enough for their help. Masaru wondered if their rank was even higher than Lancelot and his group. Fried went on to say he was genuinely impressed that they had been able to use healing magic. When he asked for Masaru's name, Masaru simply stated it, and an awkward silence followed. Masaru then added that he was an adventurer, but before he could continue, Adelina shouted at him to stop, reminding him that he had been granted an extraordinary title by the goddess. Masaru was stunned, thinking she must have been foolish, and wondered whether she was digging another hole for him just like last time. She tried to shift the situation by introducing herself and apologized, saying she was Lancelot's niece. Fried was shocked to hear that, saying the stories of Lancelot's courage and bravery had even reached the capital. He added that Adelina's current position as the coastal city's temporary ambassador was proof of their alliance. Fried also noted that she seemed to have a good relationship with the chief. The chief agreed and said that, just like what had happened at the port town, they initially suspected that the humans might have been planning an attack on the new city, which had only recently succeeded in establishing friendly relations. Fried admitted that they were ashamed for causing such suspicion. The chief responded that helping those in trouble was simply what beastmen did, but he added that Masaru had taught him not to lump all humans into a single category. He then asked why these humans had come so deep into the mountains. Fried replied that they had been sent by direct order of the king to subjugate a mutated beast. In a low voice, Adelina asked Masaru if Fried was referring to the demon bear. Fried clarified that the creature they were ordered to subjugate was a mutated horse known as the One-Horned Demon, which had dark skin and 6 legs. Masaru then remembered the horse he had seen earlier and raised his hand, saying that what he was about to reveal might be difficult to accept, but the creature had already been devoured by a similar mutated beast. Fried was stunned and asked if Masaru was talking about the demon bear, explaining that they had been attacked by it during their investigation. Because of that beast, the rest of their squad had been forced to retreat and wander the forest for an entire week. Masaru then revealed that the demon bear had already been exterminated and assured them that the surrounding area was no longer dangerous. Shocked, Fried stood up and asked what Masaru was even saying, insisting that the demon bear was a monster capable of annihilating the King's Guard platoon instantly. Masaru asked if Fried wanted to see the bear's corpse, saying he would also show them the horse's remains. Fried asked if Masaru truly had it and if he really intended to show them the horse's corpse. Masaru confirmed both, and Fried apologized for interrupting earlier. Masaru, however, was confused by Fried's extreme reaction. Although he had received an order from the king to exterminate the beast, Fried's behavior made Masaru think that the mutated horse's corpse must be incredibly valuable, and that the knights likely had ulterior motives. Suddenly, Fried proposed that Masaru hand the horse's corpse over to them. Masaru calmly refused and observed the knight's reactions. As he smiled, Adelina realized that Masaru clearly had something planned. Masaru explained that the horse had been devoured by the demon bear, but most of the body, aside from the neck, was intact. He said he could guarantee that the remains contained high-quality materials. The leg bones were extremely strong, the skin was smooth enough to make fine clothing, the size was manageable, and there was also the horn. The moment Masaru mentioned the horn, Fried's expression changed, and Masaru immediately understood that it was the item they valued most. Masaru said he was reluctant to part with it, but if the chivalric order was willing to pay extra, he would be open to selling it. As Distar was about to protest, Fried stopped him and said that Masaru was correct. Fried added that all the materials Masaru described would be worth a great deal in the market and that he had never intended to ask for them for free. He said that, luckily, there was a bounty for the subjugation, so they could make a deal. If the price they offered did not match Masaru's asking price, they would include the bounty reward as well. Masaru thought about the situation and realized that the core of the issue was the horn, since it was something the king himself wanted. He also understood that the knights only cared about completing their mission, no matter the cost. In other words, fame and authority were what mattered to them, because those were things money could not buy, and they did not seem to place much importance on monetary wealth. He then wondered how he should handle the negotiations. Depending on how things went, he could potentially strip them of every coin they had. However, the size of the reward concerned him, and he decided it would be wiser to negotiate moderately and make the kingdom's knights owe him a favor instead. After considering everything, he stood up and said he would accompany them to Gratis. Everyone seemed confused after hearing that, and Masaru went on to ask whether they would mind testifying for him, saying that he would handle the negotiation himself. He added that if the offer was good, he would gladly accept it, and if not, he could simply return with the materials. Fried stated that the resources their kingdom offered would surely meet Masaru's requirements, and he seemed pleased about it. Distar brought up the matter of a direct audience with the king. Fried responded that it wasn't as if they had never dealt directly with influential merchants before, and they were comfortable with such arrangements, though they couldn't guarantee the negotiation would go smoothly. Masaru told them not to underestimate him, explaining that he had previously worked as a broker at the home center, so negotiation was in his blood. It was then settled that he would go to the city with them. While talking with May, he said that once Fried and the others had rested enough, he would have to leave again for a while. May wasn't happy about it, so Masaru explained that the purpose of the trip was only business negotiation and that there would be no fighting. He promised he wouldn't act recklessly. Instead of accepting his excuse, Adelina told Masaru to apologize to May. She then asked what he was working on. Masaru said he was making boats, which were actually parts of the outer wall of the house, and he needed to finish as much work as possible before leaving. He then asked whether the delivery of the beds had been completed. Adelina replied that they had already been delivered to the houses currently under construction, and added that the area near the mountain slope of the city was more important, as there was no need to deliver beds there for the time being. Masaru explained that the place was meant to be the public bathhouse, and even had the potential to become a hot spring. He pointed out that since the house, bathroom, and furniture were already completed, the next step, something absolutely essential for a Japanese person, could no longer be skipped. Adelina said it was another term from Masaru's world. May wondered how they were supposed to understand what Masaru was talking about. Seth explained that it was a huge bath, and once it was finished, they could finally stop washing with cold water every day. May grew excited upon hearing that. Masaru commented that May was both angry and excited at the same time, which he found amusing. Adelina added that, just like the two-story house, a bath of that scale was usually available only to upper-class families, and she thought maintaining such a large bath would be difficult because gathering that much firewood from the mountains every day would be tough. Masaru answered that it would be a hot spring. They were confused, so he asked whether they didn't know what that was. He explained that a hot spring was a natural spring of hot water, typically heated by volcanic activity underground, and that once the spring surfaced after the ground was opened, they would be able to channel it and use it to fill the bathhouse. May wondered if Masaru could really dig something like that out of the ground. Adelina was sure only well water would come out. Masaru thought it was just luck that he had discovered it. After hearing from the rabbit hunters about a nearby river of lava, he had managed to locate an underground water source, and by using his map skill to display a 3D geographical layout of the area. However, he still hadn't figured out how to begin digging, so he needed to think of a way using the skills he had available. Adelina then said that the more important matter was that she had assumed the space was intended for the thing Masaru was making. He was confused and asked what she meant. She reminded him that he had talked about the statue of the goddess and her shrine, and asked whether he had forgotten about it, and what was with the expression on his face. Masaru replied that he was fine with the statue, but questioned whether a shrine was really necessary. Annoyed, Adelina agreed to postpone it until it would be convenient for the goddess to descend, just like during the rainy season. May agreed with Adelina, saying that they had to build a residence for the goddess. Masaru replied that it was fine, since the goddess would probably take her time coming there, so they should leave it for last and build the shrine only once they had gained more skill. Adelina said she had no complaints as long as they were going to build it. Masaru told her not to worry too much, since he would ask the goddess about it himself. Suddenly, Victinius appeared and said she wouldn't mind having it built now. Masaru realized she had greeted him by saying she had skipped her work to come visit him, and he responded that she always seemed to be enjoying herself quite a bit. At that moment, Adelina slapped him, demanding to know why he was dropping the honorifics when speaking to the goddess herself. Both May and Adelina were angry at him. Victinius then said it was fine, explaining that Masaru was the chosen one and also her envoy, so his rude behavior was forgiven. Excited, Adelina said that Victinius was incredibly benevolent and that her compassion was exactly as the legends described. Masaru then asked why Victinius had come. Victinius replied that she had a promise with someone and that she wanted to introduce that person to him and talk. Without using the status screen message, a woman appeared, Isla Saphira, and she greeted Masaru. Masaru wondered whether Saphira was Victinius's sister. Saphira confirmed it and thanked him for his efforts, saying that they were looking forward to seeing how the world developed in the foreseeable future. Masaru thought that her manner of speaking and behavior were exactly what he expected. She seemed intelligent and pure, truly fitting for a goddess. Then he looked at Victinius again, questioning inwardly whether Saphira was really her sister. Victinius asked if Masaru was denying anything, and he greeted Saphira properly, saying that he also had something he wanted to discuss with her. She asked whether something was troubling him. Masaru said that the magic mentioned in the earlier message had made him think of an idea. Victinius told him to leave the difficult topics for later and start with something simpler first. Suddenly, Saphira summoned a round table and chairs for everyone. Masaru wondered if she had used the dimensional storage skill, since the number of cups and seats she summoned matched perfectly with the number of people present. Saphira confirmed it, explaining that there was a misconception about the skill, that it was only used to take out and store items at will. In that world, she said, nothing was absolute. Skills should be used in various ways depending on the user. Masaru wondered if she meant that a person's common sense could interfere with how skills manifested, but felt there wasn't much he could do about that, even if he understood it. Saphira pointed out that he was mistaken and asked whether he himself hadn't already been using his production skills creatively. Saphira said that his achievements were precisely why she hoped he would continue pioneering the development of magic. Victinius suddenly interrupted, asking them to stop because the conversation was becoming complicated again, and insisted that they should first talk about the statue of Victinius. Masaru said he wanted her opinion on whether the statue was really necessary. Both Victinius and Saphira immediately agreed that it was. Victinius asked if Masaru had forgotten that she had told him during the rainy season that she was looking forward to it. Saphira added that she couldn't wait to see her own statue either. Masaru was stunned, wondering if he really had to make statues of both of them. When they urged him to begin the work as long as he understood, he replied that they would have to wait until he returned from the capital because he needed reference pictures. Victinius thought about it, opened her status screen, and said that if Masaru was fine with some pictures she had taken recently, she would send them to him through the status screen, though she only had frontal shots of herself. Saphira sent hers as well. Masaru considered choosing just one image. Then, after noticing a rather bold picture of Victinius, he sent that one to himself. Immediately afterward, he started to run, and Victinius shouted at him, demanding to know what he was doing and telling him to delete the picture at once. Masaru replied, respectfully, as he emphasized, that he refused, insisting that it would be a waste not to use it as a reference. He then teased her by asking for her measurements directly, saying he wouldn't need the picture if she simply told him. He added that he only needed the information for the sake of sculpting the statue, and wasn't thinking anything improper. He said that everyone should contribute in one way or another, so it would be helpful if they provided even more pictures. Victinius was shocked and furious, unable to believe that Masaru would resort to such underhanded methods to extract a maiden's secret. Saphira called his behavior shameless, and Masaru replied that they were more naive than they thought. Victinius then asked Saphira to punish him, and Saphira agreed before unleashing a massive fire spell toward him. Masaru was stunned. Compared to strengthening magic, the density of Saphira's magical power was overwhelmingly greater. He was shocked by the enormous blast, and the beam of light shooting high into the sky terrified everyone nearby. Adelina wondered if Masaru was even alive. When she and Mei ran to check, they found that he had managed to dodge the attack. Adelina commented that Masaru truly had some nerve to provoke them. Mei scolded him for being in the wrong. Masaru, however, was bewildered, wondering how any of it could possibly be his fault. He felt that their reaction had been excessive, especially since they had such impressive figures. So why were they so upset? He simply couldn't understand. People began gathering, asking what the loud noise was and whether something had happened. Adelina told everyone to hold their horses and explained that the visitors were goddesses, the very ones who had created their world. Everyone was stunned. She added that the commotion had happened at Masaru's manor. The onlookers began complimenting the goddesses, saying they looked incredibly beautiful. Masaru wondered if they were subtly taking digs at him as well. The crowd bowed in greeting to the divine visitors. Victinius felt uncomfortable dealing with such a situation, and Saphira explained that it was because both of them were unaccustomed to descending to the lower world, except during festivals or ceremonial occasions. Masaru told Victinius to pull herself together since everyone was present and urged her to get straight to the difficult topic. She responded that he had every reason to dissent, then asked whether he remembered the crabs and if he still had some left, since they wanted to taste them. Masaru was shocked to hear her say that she had told Saphira about the crabs and that they had come for that reason, as well as to ask about the statues. He felt it was tragic and thought the younger one was also a hopeless goddess like her. He said it couldn't be helped and told everyone that he had just received divine instructions from the goddess, and, since they did not yet have any products to sell to other towns, they would begin searching for ingredients that had never been seen before. When Victinius told him to stop, he replied that it was fine and that everything would go smoothly. For the first step, he told everyone they would work on expanding the vacant land in the mountain area so they could start developing farms and plantations, and that they would eventually build them throughout the city to secure the food supply. He explained that they would divide half of the building team to survey the surrounding vegetation and distinguish between poisonous, inedible, and edible plants, and that if there was anything they did not understand, they should ask him or the gathering team. He then urged everyone to get started, saying it was the goddess's request. As everyone left, Victinius remarked that she had not requested anything like that. Masaru wondered whether she had not said she wanted to eat delicious things and added that it was also the first step toward becoming self-sufficient, since he had planned to build a sample plantation sooner or later. Victinius questioned whether he had really thought it through, pointing out that building plantations throughout the city would be extremely difficult. Masaru said it was not true at all, explaining that creating fields between houses would help reduce noise from neighbors, improve sunlight and ventilation, and enhance the scenery. He thought about setting up gazebos for the landscape, similar to the resting spots commonly seen in parks. He said that gardening was also handled by the home center, so they would focus on that as well. Additionally, they would build statues and shrines. And the more beautiful the city became, the easier it would be for a certain goddess to visit and enjoy herself. Victinius asked whether Masaru meant she could eat crabs every time she came to visit. Saphira also brightened at the idea and said they were really counting on him. Masaru thought that he had indeed decided to make the place somewhere relaxing, a place they could visit with peace of mind. Feeling emotional, both of them looked at him, and he, flustered, agreed that he would treat them to a crab feast whenever they visited. They were delighted. And Masaru added that in return, he wanted to ask them for a favor. They felt it was suspicious, wondering if he intended to do something strange, and Saphira told him not to say he wanted to understand them by touching them. Masaru insisted she shouldn't jump to conclusions and explained that he simply wanted to ask her something about the magic she had mentioned when they first met. She agreed and said they would discuss it in detail after they ate the crabs. When Victinius asked what her part would be, Masaru replied that he would send her a message when the time came. She called it shady, saying she would respond when summoned but would not meddle unnecessarily. Masaru assured her there was no problem, and told her she only needed to come when she received his message. He added that he planned to head to the capital after Fried and his people recovered, and if the business negotiations went poorly, having the goddess of victory as his trump card would be essential. In the capital of Gratus, a knight informed the king that D-Star had returned with news and that the remaining troops would arrive the next day. The king said that was enough and told him it didn't matter. He should get straight to the point and report whether they had managed to obtain the horn of the mutated beast. 2 weeks later, Masaru and Fried reached the entrance of the kingdom. Masaru remarked that he hadn't expected Fried to arrange a carriage to pick him up and added that it was exactly what one would expect from the capital. He then admitted that this wasn't the main issue. The capital was extremely far, and the 7-day journey had exhausted him. Fried responded that it was only because Masaru had insisted on running the entire way. He explained that a carriage had been prepared, but Masaru had refused to ride it. Masaru complained that his back hurt badly, even when he sat in the carriage. Fried pointed out that ordinarily people wouldn't jump off a carriage and decide to run instead, especially with such reasoning. They finally entered Gratus, the capital of the most powerful kingdom on the continent. Masaru thought about how, after making a promise with the goddess, he had traveled to the capital together with Fried and his men once they had fully recovered. His future business partner would be the king of the human race, someone who, in another world, was responsible for the expulsion of beastmen from the port city. Masaru fully intended to use this opportunity to settle that score. He recalled his conversation with the chief of Rabbit Fork, who had told him that it wasn't necessary to hesitate and that he should proceed with the deal as he saw fit. Masaru agreed, since the chief had said so, but he couldn't ignore that the other party was the one who had robbed them of their homes and turned them into slaves. The chief understood Masaru's feelings and explained, just as he had once told Fried, that there were people like Masaru in the world, but the other side might also have had no choice except to expand their territory for the sake of their own people. The chief added that although they had their own reservations, there was no need to fill the children or the town with grudge, hatred, or envy. He said he only had one request for the negotiations. Masaru should keep everyone's interests in mind. Masaru stopped worrying after that, thinking that it was precisely because of the rabbit folk's character that he wanted to help them in the first place. Fried called out to Masaru, wondering if he was even listening. Masaru snapped out of his thoughts and apologized for being distracted. Fried explained that he had been saying they had several matters to deal with at the capital. The first was an audience with the king, and he had already sent Dister ahead to deliver the news. He then suggested they head to the castle. Masaru looked around the market and commented that he had never seen such fruits before and would have to buy some on his way back. Fried was startled and told him to focus. Masaru reassured him that he had heard everything clearly and knew they were supposed to meet the king first. Fried was relieved that Masaru understood and added that he needed to complete some formalities before the audience, so Masaru should wait somewhere in the meantime. Masaru then asked about the Adventurers Guild, causing Fried to wonder why he wanted to wait there and whether he had any business with them. With a chilling smile, Masaru said there was something he needed to know before meeting the king. Fried then left, and Masaru entered the guild, thinking it was exactly what he expected. filled with people who looked like veteran knights. At the reception, the lady greeted him and asked whether he wanted to post a request or take one. Masaru replied that he wanted to try working as an adventurer. The lady seemed confused and asked what he meant. Masaru said he had heard about a one-horned mutated beast appearing and wanted to know the market price of its materials, along with those of several other monsters. She directed him to another staff member who could answer those questions. The man asked if Masaru wanted information about the market value of mutated beasts and other monsters, wondering aloud if Masaru already had such materials in his possession. Masaru hesitated, and the man assured him that these were common questions for a new adventurer. Masaru simply smiled. The man then showed him several cards and explained the prices. Materials from normal monsters were bought for around 100 bronze coins, or a single silver coin. For monsters capable of using magic, prices started at about 100 silver coins, equal to 1 gold coin. For dragons, the price would start at 100 gold coins. He continued explaining that mutated beasts were extremely rare because they were formed from magical elements, and their strength was far beyond that of normal monsters. So much so that even a platoon of the king's two-handed guards would struggle against one. Their materials were so valuable that wars had never been waged over them. The guild purchased them occasionally, but most were auctioned by the merchant association. Even a single tooth from a mutated beast could cost thousands of gold coins. Masaru thought through everything and realized the total value could reach around 100 million. He was shocked, and the man commented that it seemed as though Masaru had just realized that the materials he possessed were worth an absurd amount of money. Masaru denied it and asked if the man could give him the specific market prices of individual parts. Masaru eventually stood in front of the castle, with Fried, who asked what he had been doing at the guild, since Masaru had been giggling to himself the entire way back. Masaru replied that it was nothing significant, only that he had gained some useful information, and now he was looking forward to meeting the king. Fried stepped closer and asked him to promise he wouldn't cause trouble. Masaru wondered why everyone assumed he was a troublemaker when he never did things on purpose. The guards then instructed Masaru to leave his belongings there. Fried introduced himself and asked the guards to report their arrival to the king. After formally identifying himself, he entered with Masaru. Inside, only guards and one other man stood beside the king, who sat on the throne. The king wondered aloud if Masaru was the person Fried had spoken of. Masaru was slightly surprised upon seeing him and reminded himself to get his act together. He couldn't afford to show any weakness. The other man questioned why Masaru remained standing and told him he should kneel in the presence of the king. Masaru thought about the trump card he now had and simply refused to kneel, introducing himself directly to the king instead. The others were shocked and told him to watch his words. The king introduced himself as Axion, ruler of the human race and the king of Gratis. He said he liked Masaru's boldness and that the insolence was acceptable, for now, because he happened to be in an exceptionally good mood. However, he warned Masaru to be careful, because if that mood were ruined, the consequences would be unimaginable. After that, he instructed Fried to deliver the full report. After Fried explained everything, the king learned that the beastmen had been building a city in the mountains, had successfully defeated the mutated beast, and that Masaru had been assigned the task of grinding down the materials from the exceptionally tough creature. The king expressed his appreciation for Fried's report. Masaru then took out the head of the mutated horned beast to show the king. The king recognized it immediately, saying it was the same one he had mentioned earlier, and admitting that he had half given up on ever obtaining it. He remarked that it was an unexpected blessing and stated that Fried would be rewarded generously. One of the attendants instructed Masaru to offer the head of the one-horned mutated beast to the king, but Masaru pretended not to care and refused. The king was shocked, wondering if Masaru meant that they should offer it to him. Masaru denied it and asked the attendant what they expected him to do. He explained that he had brought the beast head there, but it still belonged to him, and he wanted to conduct a trade, not make an offering. The king found Masaru's stance intriguing and asked whether Masaru intended to negotiate with the king himself. Masaru said he would gladly give the king whatever he wanted, but if that were the case, then the king should consider it a favor from him. The king wondered aloud whether a subject should revere the royal lineage, insisting that such hierarchy was the natural order. He added that if a subject wished to stand on equal footing with him, he would not object to them pushing their limits. Yet he became angry, saying that looking down on one's liege was sacrilegious and unacceptable. Masaru realized that the king was angered and felt an overwhelming pressure, stronger than anything he had ever sensed even from Lancelot. He quickly lowered his guard, bowed, and apologized for overstepping in his words. The king remarked that Masaru seemed to understand that being a king was not merely about ruling land and people. A king was an unfathomable existence. He said Masaru did not appear entirely ignorant and repeated that a king was a being favored by the gods, a superior existence. Masaru agreed, saying a little bird had told him that during the king's creation ceremony, the king had been so nervous he had stumbled over his own name several times, which he found to be an amusing story. The king suddenly realized what Masaru was referring to and rose from his throne, repeatedly asking Masaru to wait and demanding to know how a commoner like him had learned that, since only the captains of the royal guard and a few bothersome relatives had been present at the coronation. Masaru reminded him again that a little bird had told him. Then he moved his hand behind him and said it was time to begin the main event. A portal opened, and through it, the goddess Victinias appeared. Victinias said she had come only to fulfill her promise, and she asked the king whether he was speaking too casually to a goddess. The king, along with Fried and the butler, was left in complete shock at seeing the goddess Victinias standing before them. The king was stunned, questioning who Masaru even was, especially since he himself had witnessed the heavenly figure of a goddess only once, when he had been around 30 years old. Now he could not understand why the goddess was present or why Masaru was casually having a tea party with her, right in front of him. Victinias said she had been praised by Hera and commented that the development of her world was progressing extremely well. Masaru asked her to wait for a moment and told her to give him at least some credit, though he supposed it was fine since she was the one who had allowed him to enter this world. She asked whether he truly thought that way and remarked that if she was in a good mood, he should be happy for her. She added that her sister had asked her to inform him that she was already working on his request, then displayed the image her sister had sent. Masaru checked it and saw that Sephira was already handling the matter without needing any reminder, proving she was indeed a good goddess, unlike a certain useless one. Victinias was shocked, wondering if he was referring to her. Still, she asked why Sephira had descended into the world in the first place. Masaru explained that he had made a separate request to her, and that Sephira had descended to assist him with it. Victinias asked whether that meant Sephira was interfering too much in mortal affairs, but Masaru replied that they had considered various methods to keep everything within reasonable limits. At that point, the king asked Masaru to explain what was going on. Masaru told him to figure it out himself. Shocked, the king asked him to at least give him some time to hear an explanation. Victinias then made the table and chairs disappear, apologizing for being so absorbed in the conversation since it had been a long time since she had descended. She greeted Axion, the king, saying that time truly flew, because the last time she had met him, he had been so young. Axion agreed, but said the issue was not age. He expressed how honored he was to meet her again and asked what relationship Masaru shared with her. Victinias replied that their relationship was one of goddess and subordinate, adding that Masaru had been getting overly carried away recently. Masaru answered that he didn't want to hear such things from a slacker like her, and insisted that he had only been acting on her behalf that day, so it shouldn't count. As they spoke, Axion wondered whether Masaru was a divine messenger or someone connected to the gods. Masaru denied it, saying he was just an ordinary person and a human like everyone else. He felt the situation was unfolding more or less as he had expected, yet he couldn't reveal that he was reincarnated, since giving a proper explanation would be difficult. Because he wasn't entirely opposed to Victinias, he moved closer to her and asked if she could explain things to Axion in a simple way without it being considered excessive divine involvement. After thinking for a moment, Victinias said that she and Masaru shared a bond of friendship. Axion was shocked to hear this. Masaru commented that this was the most reasonable explanation they could hope for. Victinias, however, became confused, wondering whether she should consider Masaru a friend or a follower, especially since he was also building her statue. Masaru wanted to ask where she even got that idea. Suddenly, Victinias seemed to remember something and told Axion to prepare some mithril for Masaru, insisting that he should use only the best materials. Masaru asked her to stop for a moment and look at what was actually happening. Masaru understood that no one could easily refuse a request from a god. Victinias then said that everything she was doing was for the sake of her beautiful statue. Masaru explained that he was currently conducting business with the king and couldn't afford such interruptions. At that moment, Hera arrived and told Victinias that she was overstepping her authority. Victinias was shocked, and as Hera pulled her away, Hera remarked that even a full 24-hour sermon course would be nothing for her. Victinias protested, asking if it was really that much, and why Hera's strength stats were so absurd. Before leaving, she called out to Masaru, reminding him that she had kept her end of the bargain and telling him she would expect her fill of crabs the next time she visited, asking him not to forget. Then she disappeared, and Masaru apologized to the king for the disturbance. The king was irritated and couldn't believe that a goddess actually had a human as a friend. He then ordered everyone else to leave because he wanted to speak with Masaru privately. Once the room was empty, the king sat on his throne, saying the day had been full of surprises and asked whether Masaru had anything else prepared. Masaru felt that he was constantly being taken advantage of because of his friendship with Victinias and mentioned that he had already agreed to build a statue for her and prepare a feast of crabs whenever she visited. The king asked about the statue, wondering if Masaru could build another one in his own country as well, saying that the skills of a man trusted by the gods would surely be more than sufficient. Masaru wondered whether the king was trying to make a deal with him. The king agreed, saying it was to pay his respects to God and that he would personally enter the negotiation. He added that he had one condition and hoped Masaru would not refuse to sell the horn to him, insisting that he must obtain it no matter what. Masaru asked why the king was going so far to acquire the horn of the one-horned mutated beast. The king then showed him a staff, explaining that it was the reason. He said the scepter was believed to have been carved from the horn of a one-horned mutated beast by the founding king. Because of that, the creature was considered to share a bond with the country, and it had become a long-standing tradition for a new scepter to be given to each succeeding king. He mentioned that he had already passed his prime, so he wanted to prepare before the time came, as he could not know when the next mutated beast would appear. He added that generations of kings had fulfilled that duty without fail, so he had to do the same. Masaru agreed and asked if they should proceed with the negotiation. He still felt something was off about the scepter and requested to borrow it for a moment, asking whether it had belonged to the king's predecessor. The king replied that it was the staff of the founding king. Masaru used his appraisal skill on the scepter and discovered that it was made from the horn of a unicorn, not from a one-horned mutated beast. The king dismissed it as nonsense and questioned how Masaru had made such a claim. Masaru responded that he had used the appraisal skill and was completely certain the scepter had not been made from a mutated beast. He then wondered aloud if the deal was now cancelled. The king asked whether Masaru was telling the truth. Masaru asked why he would lie. The king argued that Masaru understood the value of the mutated beast's horn and might be trying to mislead him, or perhaps Masaru had changed his mind about selling and was attempting to deceive him. Masaru replied that negotiation was a process in which both parties sought common ground for the best outcome, and that he would never betray the trust of his negotiation partner. He even said he could swear on Victinia's name and asked the king to believe him. The king said he understood what kind of person Masaru was, and that deception was common in negotiations. Yet he would place his trust in Masaru and still buy the horn. He added that he no longer needed the horn for the original purpose and would only pay the market price. Masaru was surprised but said he did not mind, since the payment would still be large. He asked again if the king was sure, pointing out that the cost would still be considerable. The king replied that materials from mutated beasts were extremely valuable and that simply possessing one would elevate his prestige. He also said that having an item obtained through a negotiation with someone known as a friend of God would cause his reputation to spread across the land. In the end, it seemed the king would gain far more benefits than Masaru. The king wondered if that arrangement was not acceptable. Masaru denied it and shook hands with him, saying they should make the deal. The king then turned to ask what Masaru planned to do afterward. Masaru thought for a moment and replied that he wanted to continue the negotiation, mentioning that since they were in the capital, the king likely had a large stock of goods, and he wished to purchase the surplus. The king said it was negotiable but explained that he had other matters to attend to, so he suggested continuing their discussion at a later time. He also asked whether Masaru planned to stay there for a while. Masaru answered that it would be fine, as he intended to tour the capital and remain for a few days to buy supplies. The king then said he would assign a guide to accompany him around the capital, which would also make it easier for him to contact Masaru. Masaru thanked him for the help. The king added that he already had a perfect candidate in mind, a knight who was somewhat different from the others. Masaru later went to meet the knight, whose name was Zack. Zack apologized, explaining that he was busy with an important deal at the moment. Masaru was confused as to why Zack was doing accounting work and whether he was a knight who also specialized in library-related tasks. Fried told Zack to relax, saying they only wanted to ask if he was skilled at making things. Zack replied that he would not go so far as to call himself gifted, but he was capable of such work because of how he had been raised. He said his father, a former engineer, had opened a workshop after leaving the army, producing stone and bricks used for construction in the castle town, and Zack had often helped him. Masaru grew excited upon hearing about the workshop and moved closer to Zack. Zack wondered who Masaru even was. Masaru said Zack was the perfect person for the job and showed him a scroll containing a recommendation letter from the king. He introduced himself and said he would be in Zack's care during his stay in the capital and would be staying in the workshop, counting on Zack's support. Zack was completely confused and asked what Masaru was even talking about. As Masaru continued talking to Zack, Zack finally understood his situation. Masaru told him to drop the formal language and speak to him like a friend. Zack agreed and said he did not mind giving Masaru a tour around the capital, but he asked why Masaru needed to stay at his house. Masaru explained that he was interested in the bricks and hoped he might get a discount if he introduced himself as Zack's friend. Zack was shocked and wondered if Masaru was always that direct. Masaru said it was fine and added that there was a saying that the customer was king. Zack, confused about why he had never heard such a saying, admitted that having a customer would indeed help him. Zack then showed him his store, which turned out to be an old, ruined building. Masaru was taken aback and wondered what had happened. Zack admitted that the store was a bit messy. When they entered, Masaru recalled that Zack had said it wasn't as bad as it looked, since his father had been giving it his all. Masaru understood that the business was probably not doing well, but he also saw that the bricks were not bad and had been properly fired in the kilns. He decided to use his appraisal skill and discovered that the bricks were actually of high quality. The joints at the sides were neatly made, and the stones had been cut into small, precise pieces. He realized Zack's father was a very skilled craftsman, though Zack himself seemed clueless about the basics of running a business. Masaru then asked to meet Zack's father, saying he needed to give him a lecture before they began discussing business. Zack agreed and said his father was probably burning bricks behind the store. They went around the back while Zack called out to him, saying he had brought a customer. Suddenly, they heard a voice from inside a room as Zack's father wondered aloud if Zack could keep it down since he was inside. When Masaru entered, he thought that he had finally arrived and that this was probably the first time he would meet such a skilled craftsman. Zack asked his father why he wasn't burning the bricks as usual, since he was normally obsessed with the work, and wondered if he was feeling unwell. His father responded that he had no money left. Not only had he run out of funds for the bricks, but they didn't even have enough to put food on the table for the next day. Masaru was stunned, thinking the man was the typical example of a good-for-nothing father who gave nothing to his family as long as he could chase his passion. Zack said none of it made sense, and asked about the workers, wondering where his father's disciples had gone. His father revealed that all of them had run off with the money the previous month, and he admitted that he hadn't paid their wages for 3 months. Zack was horrified and asked why his father sounded proud of that. He then asked about his sister and how she could have let things get this bad. His father replied that she wasn't home and said she would do whatever she could in the morning. Zack, shocked, wondered if she was resorting to extreme measures to earn money. His father denied it, explaining that she had gone to work at a rival shop. While they spoke, Masaru observed the surroundings. Zack, overwhelmed and frustrated, ended up agreeing with his father and slapped him hard. Masaru told him to calm down and then asked how many bricks they had in stock. Zack's father said he didn't know because Diana, the cashier, wasn't present. Zack explained that Diana was his older sister and wondered how his father could run a store without even knowing the inventory. Masaru said that even if many customers visited the shop, he doubted they could sell anything in that state. Zack's father complained that the customers had no eye for quality and insisted the bricks were the best in the capital, questioning why they weren't selling. Masaru explained that the store created a terrible impression and that the service industry depended on trust and presentation. He said that high-quality goods were important, but doing business in a filthy shop was unacceptable. He told them they needed to fix the store first, otherwise their products would never get the chance to shine. The first step, he said, was to organize the materials so customers could see what was available at a glance. With a well-managed inventory, the impression of the shop would improve dramatically. Zack's father asked him whether Masaru was really a customer. Masaru said that he had said all he needed for the moment, that he would stay at the inn for the day, and that he was about to leave. As he was leaving, Zack said he would go and look for his sister to calculate how many supplies they had. Masaru said that was good and suggested meeting at the castle again at noon the next day. Zack agreed but asked what they would do about the one-horned mutated beast. Masaru answered that he would settle the matter of the mutated beast the next morning and finish the rest of the negotiation. The next day, Masaru was with the king and another official, and he was given the payment for subjugating the one-horned mutated beast along with the reward money. Masaru was pleased to see such a large amount and wondered if it was really fine for him to take the reward. The official assured him that it was, saying that he had made a great contribution to the kingdom by defeating the beast and protecting the people, so he should accept the reward. The king said that since that part of the deal was finished, they should move on to the next part of the negotiation and asked whether Masaru wanted to purchase the surplus supplies. He explained the quantity, saying that about 20% of last year's barley and wheat harvest was available if Masaru found it acceptable. Masaru replied that he was satisfied with whatever amount the king offered. The king said that once they reached an agreement, he would calculate the cost together with the amount they had already settled earlier. The official beside him added that they could also offer other goods such as soybeans. Masaru asked him to explain in detail. The official said that compared to barley and wheat, soybeans were not as high a priority, but since they had a large stock of them, Masaru could buy all of it if he wanted, and Masaru asked how much they had. He was told that most of the soybeans were still unground and unprocessed, stored separately each year. Masaru said that was excellent and decided to buy all of them, asking for the price. The price negotiations continued between Masaru and the king, and after some time they finally reached an agreement. Masaru said the negotiation had gone better than he expected. The official agreed, saying that it was a pleasure doing business with Masaru. He also mentioned that it was rare for the king himself to attend such negotiations. And because of this occasion, civil servants like them had more opportunities to stay in touch with the king and help him manage the kingdom's internal affairs more effectively. Masaru told the official that he should report important matters directly to the king, and that as a commoner, it was not his place to speak so casually about such things. The official said he would keep Masaru's advice in mind and added that when they had more supplies in stock, they would certainly contact him. Masaru asked why they had accumulated so many supplies. The king replied that some were reserved for disaster relief, but most were meant for army expeditions and military campaigns. Masaru thought that, considering the tragedy that had once struck the rabbit folk, his guess was probably not far from the truth. He then said it seemed wasteful to prepare for so many expeditions, which he believed were unnecessary. The king answered that such words came from someone who had no idea how to rule, and that expeditions were essential. He said he was simply doing what he believed necessary to bring prosperity to his realm. Masaru replied that he understood the king's policy of expansion, but said it was equally important to consolidate and stabilize the kingdom, warning that the country might someday collapse from internal unrest. The king wondered aloud why a friend of the gods would concern himself with the state of their country, saying that Masaru need not worry about such matters and that their opinions differed only because their perspectives were different. Masaru agreed and said it was precisely because of those differences that he wanted to offer some advice. As he stood up, he told the king that his responsibility was to bring real prosperity to the territories under his rule, and that cities could develop and flourish without relying on expeditions or invasions. He used the Beastman city he was currently building as an example, saying it stood as proof of his words and that the standard of living there had greatly improved. Masaru asked the king not to forget to visit once the city was ready, and suggested that he also visit the coastal city, saying the king would likely understand what he meant after seeing it. He added that there was always a way to coexist, and hoped the king would think about it more carefully, since all people were loved by the gods. He believed it was better for everyone to set aside their differences and get along. The king remarked that, as expected, their viewpoints were entirely different. Masaru reminded him that looking down on people simply because they belonged to an inferior race was wrong and not worthy of any nation. Suddenly, Masaru stopped speaking and glared at the king, leaving both the king and the official shocked. Masaru then walked forward, saying that their discussion was finished for the day and that he would come to say goodbye before leaving the capital. He asked them to remember to pay him in gold coins, then left. After he was gone, the king asked the official whether he thought the choices he had made so far were incorrect. The official replied that the king's decisions had always been for the sake of the people and the country, and that the current state of the kingdom was the result of his rule. However, he admitted that Masaru's words also made sense. The king said he felt the same and believed it must be the will of the gods that Masaru had come. He added that if Masaru's words were not wrong, then it would be wise to consider following his advice. The king said that Masaru had mentioned the coastal city, where Lancelot was, as well as the preparations for his visit to the Beastman city. The official agreed and mentioned the king's guard. The king wondered why the answer wasn't obvious, saying that there was no need for shields or swords on such an occasion and that they should simply follow his orders, as they would now be taking up pens instead. Meanwhile, Masaru was walking through the capital with Zack. Masaru thanked him for coming to pick him up at the castle. Zack said that Masaru had looked like a headless chicken in there, so it was a good thing he had gone to fetch him. He then noted that Masaru seemed to be in a good mood and asked if the negotiation had gone well. Masaru agreed, saying that he had obtained everything he needed and had spoken his mind, so it could not have gone better. Zack wondered aloud if Masaru had truly spoken whatever he wanted to the king, and said Masaru was incredibly fearless. Masaru then asked whether Zack's sister had returned. Zack said she had, and that she was doing the accounting work at the moment. He reminded Masaru not to act rashly in front of her. Masaru wondered why he was always being warned not to be rash, insisting that he acted logically. Zack, however, was concerned about how talkative Masaru could be. Masaru replied that he was a guest, so there was nothing to worry about. Zack then led him inside, and his sister invited them to come in. She greeted Masaru and introduced herself as Diana. Masaru apologized for barging in, but Diana said she didn't mind, and that they were happy to have him there. Masaru asked if she was in the middle of the accounting work and remarked that there seemed to be a tremendous amount of supplies. She explained that the warehouse was something their father had bought on his own, and that he also had to calculate the supplies in the store, so the work was taking more time than Masaru had expected. Diana said she would be done soon, and told Masaru to sit there. Masaru asked if he could look around the warehouse, and she allowed him. As he looked around, he thought the place was packed with supplies and felt excited just seeing all of it. He checked the materials, noting that everything was handcrafted and that he would be able to put them to good use. When he examined a piece of metal and wondered whether it was steel or ceramic, he asked Diana about it. She answered that it was something special, explaining that her father had invented it when he was a soldier. It was light and sturdy, but its production cost was extremely high, and the materials were very rare, which made mass production difficult and limited its popularity. Masaru asked if she was sure and requested that she explain why she had so much of it. She replied that she had kicked her father out of the house the previous day because he had tried to mortgage it, and they still needed to deal with his debts. Zach said that if they had a big customer, it would be great, and they might even be able to clear the debt. Masaru thought about it, knowing he could afford to buy everything in the store. Diana then asked what he thought. Masaru said he needed to discuss something with them and asked first whether he would get a discount if he bought everything. They were shocked and said he would definitely receive a discount and that selling all the goods would allow them to pay off the debt, which would be a blessing. Masaru said the matter was settled and that he would purchase everything in exchange for their willingness to hear his proposal. Zach said he felt embarrassed because he had a bad feeling about the situation. Masaru told them not to worry, adding that given their circumstances, they would definitely like what he was about to say. Zach asked Diana what they should do, and she said they should listen to Masaru first. Masaru then asked them to move to his city. They were shocked, and Zach said he knew Masaru was going to say something ridiculous because asking them to leave their home in the capital was no small matter, especially with everything happening with their father. Diana added that Masaru was referring to the Beastman city he was currently building. Masaru confirmed this, explaining that, in simpler terms, he hoped they would move there to help with the city's construction. He added that there would be benefits. They would be guaranteed 3 meals a day, and there would be no limit on the work they could take on. Their father would even get his own workshop and helpers to assist him in making bricks. Zach wondered if Masaru was truly serious, since the conditions were very favorable. Diana said that although she wasn't being discriminatory, it was still a Beastman city, a place they weren't familiar with, and one with very few humans. Masaru said that wouldn't be a problem, explaining that the only human currently living there was a girl named Adelina, and that as time passed, he would invite more human craftsmen to the city. He then asked if they knew any craftsmen who were struggling financially. He said he would get permission from the king himself to hire them, which would put everyone more at ease and allow him to secure additional manpower. Zach hesitated, noticing Masaru's rather evil expression. Masaru said that things were going to get exciting, and that adding more manpower would greatly benefit the city's development. He asked if just imagining it didn't excite them. When they showed no reaction, he continued, saying that if they didn't have the required skills or knowledge, it would be difficult for them to learn the new techniques and theories used in the city. He asked them to take time to think about his proposal. Returning to the original topic, he brought up the 10% discount for the supplies so they could finalize the deal. They said they had no problem with it. Masaru then asked if he could pay them in gold coins and if he could repay their debts and give them the remaining amount in gold as well, since it would help him a lot by sparing him from carrying so much gold on his way back. They were both shocked to hear that, and Diana said it would be great if it worked for Masaru, suggesting they take care of it immediately. Zach also asked Masaru to head outside. Masaru said he was fine with that but felt they were in a hurry. Diana explained that before their father caused any more trouble, it was better to settle the debt as soon as possible. Zach seemed worried too, saying they feared their father might do something like buy another warehouse behind their backs. Masaru was shocked and suggested they go, though he was starting to get a bad feeling about the situation. They went to a shop where a man shouted in irritation, asking how many times he had to say they were closed as someone kept knocking on the door. When he opened it and saw Diana from the brick shop, he asked if she needed money again because she looked like she was in a hurry. She denied it, saying they no longer needed to borrow from him. The man immediately thought of something inappropriate and said he didn't mind that kind of payment. Masaru and Zach were both angered. Masaru said they were only there to repay what they owed, so what was wrong with him? Zach added that if the man dared lay a hand on Diana, he wouldn't let him off so easily. Diana was completely confused by their reactions. When the man checked the money pouch Masaru placed before him, he was surprised at how much money the brick shop had. Diana explained it was enough to repay the debt along with the interest. Zach felt relieved, saying they could finally escape the spiral of debt. But the man said that, although they had gathered a lot, it still wasn't enough. They were all shocked, and Zach asked if their father had borrowed more money without telling them. Diana wondered how much they still owed. The man told them to calm down and reminded them about the warehouse they had rented. Diana asked if he meant the one where they stored the plates. Zach said there should have been no issues since they paid all the bills. The man then explained that their father had remodeled the warehouse without permission, using a ladder to build a shelf on the wall, making a hole in the ceiling to create a bedroom, and that the amount they brought wasn't enough to cover the damages. All three of them were furious. Zach said he had wondered why he hadn't seen his father at home or at the shop, and now he understood what he had been doing. Diana told him not to cry and to calm down. They all wondered how they were going to handle the situation. Masaru asked what would happen if they simply restored everything to its original state. The man said he wouldn't mind that and welcomed them to do it. By nighttime, Masaru was completely exhausted from working in the warehouse workshop, drained from cleaning up the mess Zach's father had created. Diana apologized to him for everything. Masaru stretched his body and said it was fine, and that he happened to know a way to relieve some stress. Zach was shocked and told Masaru not to cause any trouble in the capital, asking whether he wanted the king's guards to get involved. Masaru said it sounded like a great idea, but there was a simpler solution. When Zach asked what he meant, Masaru said he planned to go shopping. He would shop to his heart's content in the castle town. He asked whether they didn't feel refreshed after splurging on shopping. Zach replied that if anything, it only made him more anxious. Diana then asked if the shopping was for the Beastman city. Masaru said half of the money would be for the city and the other half for himself. They wondered if this was related to the topic from that afternoon about recruiting craftsmen. Masaru agreed, saying he was looking forward to it. Since the city was still under construction and not yet named, having craftsmen willing to move and settle there would be extremely helpful. If he could bring high-quality goods into the city, its industry could flourish, and with time, it could grow into a metropolis that might even surpass the capital. He asked them to imagine the possibilities, adding that he couldn't wait to return and continue building it. Diana said it would be a difficult hurdle to overcome compared to their father's small business, because the scale was entirely different. Masaru agreed that it would be hard, but said joining in the city's construction was fun, and if it weren't, he wouldn't bother investing so much effort. Diana mentioned how her father left all the workshop's financial affairs to her and was content just making bricks. As she stood there quietly, Zach asked if something was wrong. She said it was nothing, then asked if Masaru planned to go shopping the next day. Masaru said he would go in the morning and asked why she wanted to know. She asked him to stop by their store so she and Zach could show him around the Castletown marketplace. While doing that, they could also introduce him to their acquaintances who were craftsmen. Masaru thought it was a great idea since he could meet them face to face. Suddenly, Zach put a hand on his sister's shoulder and told her to stop, saying Masaru was even more eccentric than their father, so she should let him handle everything alone. Diana said it was fine. She wanted a break from all the accounting work, and she was sure it would be fun exploring the castle town with Masaru. Zach agreed, saying the next day would be another busy one for him. Masaru said he would go renovate the warehouse before calling it a day. After everything, the night passed, and the next morning they went to several craftsmen's shops, meeting everyone and buying various items. As Masaru examined all the goods, he was shocked and couldn't help reflecting on his actions amidst the fun memories of the past few days. Zach said Masaru looked miserable, and that he could see why after looking at all those materials. With how much Masaru had purchased, he wouldn't be surprised if the market was already in chaos. He then asked Masaru what he planned to do next. Masaru replied that the Castle Merchant Association had asked him to make a list of what he had bought so they could double-check the condition of the market's goods. Zach wondered if Masaru had just taken anything he liked, since it looked as though he had bought far more than intended. Masaru then showed Zach what he called the real bargain, and used a portal to take out the green goat, also known as the widow goat. Zach was stunned to see it. Masaru added that he also had 4 horned rabbits and some wild cutter quails, all of which he had bought from the Adventurer Guild. Zach was shocked, saying they were all mutated beasts, and asked what Masaru planned to do with them. Masaru said he would be raising them. He explained that a wild cutter quail could lay 5 eggs at a time every 3 days. A horned rabbit could give birth to 14 offspring in a year and was delicious to eat, and the widow goats could produce milk. With all of that, he could finally start raising livestock. As Masaru looked proud of himself, Zach asked him to please avoid doing dangerous things, especially since Diana seemed likely to move to Masaru's city. Zach said he couldn't help worrying because he wouldn't be able to go with her. Masaru was surprised and asked why Zach wouldn't come along. Zach asked why he would go in the first place. Masaru asked if he had forgotten to mention that he already had permission from the king to recruit craftsmen, and that as part of the agreement, a unit from Gratis would be stationed in the Beastman city to help with technological matters. Zach was surprised and tried to guess what Masaru meant, and Masaru confirmed it. He explained that the captain of the unit would also act as the ambassador, and Zach had been nominated for that position. Masaru said he was really glad the ambassador would be someone he could talk to comfortably. Zach was stunned, saying he wouldn't be able to refuse if it was a royal order. He then asked why he had suddenly become a captain. Masaru commented that Zach seemed really troubled. Zach, nervous, said he had recently gotten a girlfriend. Masaru hesitated, wondering how to put it, and then said Zack would have no problem finding a new girlfriend. Zack asked if he was serious. Just then, Diana rushed toward them. Masaru was confused. Zack said it was rare to see Diana at the castle and wondered why she was running. She said it was about Masaru's offer to move to the Beastman city, and she had decided to accept his proposal. Masaru was thrilled, and Zack wondered if she had come just to say that. She denied it and said she was there to sell their shop and land in preparation for the move. She went straight to the Merchant Guild reception inside the castle. Masaru wondered if she had encountered a problem. She handed him a paper and asked him to look at it. Masaru read that the guild appreciated their patronage and had assessed the sale of their house and land. Because of the poor location and deterioration of the building, they would be charged demolition fees. Masaru and Zack were both shocked to hear such news. They went to the Merchant Guild, and while Masaru went inside to speak, Diana asked her brother whether Masaru would be all right and if he might run into trouble while filing the complaint against Tranny. Zack replied that Masaru had already been inside for a while, but he believed everything would be fine because it was Masaru, someone who had even negotiated with the king on his own. When Masaru finally returned, they felt that the negotiation had not gone well. Masaru looked irritated, and they thought he didn't seem okay, so they asked him what had happened. Masaru told them he had managed to raise the value of the store and land a little, but the overall estimation had been accurate. He admitted he couldn't win against their arguments, and the brick store was simply too worn down. Zack was shocked and said that not only would the house be demolished, but the demolition fees were also extremely high. Diana added that she had thought demolishing it themselves would help with their preparations to move, but instead, there were even more expenses now. Masaru said he was not happy at all about the extra costs, so he would handle the issue himself. When Masaru opened a portal, Zack grew nervous, wondering what Masaru was planning and what he intended to take out. Masaru said it was obvious what he was about to do since it had been a long time since he had been this angry. He then pulled out a frightening weapon and began smashing the store's walls, covering it from all sides. Zack mentioned he had been worried that once Masaru pulled out that morning star, he might attack the Merchant Guild, but they eventually realized Masaru planned to use it elsewhere. They admitted they had not expected Masaru to take on the whole demolition himself, just to avoid paying the demolition fees. Masaru then struck the store again. Afterwards, he looked around and said he couldn't believe he finally had a chance to use the morning star he had crafted for fun back in the coastal city. He asked why it had suddenly become so noisy and whether something had happened. Zack answered that it was obviously because Masaru had started a flashy demolition show. He added that although such scenes might be normal for someone who hunted mutated beasts, using such a dangerous weapon to tear down a house still felt reckless. Masaru told them it was already done, and while it might look ridiculous, he was only using the Morning Star as a replacement for a hammer to break down the walls, and the crushed stones could later be reused as gravel. Zack understood then that Masaru intended to avoid wasting anything. Masaru agreed and explained that he was preparing properly for the demolition. Before starting, they would need to warn the neighbors because of all the noise. He had even used his construction skills to build a cover to soundproof the area and keep dust and debris from spreading. He explained that as long as they kept these precautions in mind, everything would be fine. Using his skill to recycle the waste materials, he could probably finish the demolition by the next day, so he asked Zack to leave it to him. Zack hadn't realized how much work was involved. Masaru believed that since Zack would eventually accompany him as the ambassador of the exchange, having Zack help with these kinds of tasks would be useful, and Zack seemed genuinely interested. Masaru thought it would benefit him greatly if Zack became capable in these areas. Zack's father came over and said he had cut the wood according to the measurements Masaru had given him, so he asked Masaru to come take a look once he finished there. He was surprised to see Zack and Diana as well. Masaru explained that he wanted to finish the demolition quickly because he needed to move on to another project, which was why he had hired their father for help. He added that, as expected of a craftsman, Zack's father was extremely skilled. Zack's father replied that he would proceed with the mass production. Zack was shocked and wondered what Masaru was planning. Masaru asked if he hadn't told them, saying it bothered him to demolish the house only to be taken advantage of by the Merchant Guild. He intended to build a new blacksmith shop there and sell it to them at a high price. Zack, still shocked, said he didn't know whether to praise Masaru's commercial spirit or call him a child who hated losing. Masaru insisted he was justified. Diana told her father she hadn't expected him to take such a job since he never seemed interested in making bricks alone. Her father wondered what she meant and said that not only could he give the guild, which had rejected their brick shop, a run for their money, but he could also earn some himself and feel good about it. So of course he would accept. Zack was relieved that his father remained so confident. Masaru asked Zack to help his father for a while, and once they were done, there would likely be nothing else left to do. After they finished remodeling the house, it would be time to return to the Beastman city. Zack agreed and said he had gotten used to how unreasonable Masaru could be. Exciting, but also frightening. Masaru said that once they gathered all the materials, he would use his construction skill to finish things, then depart in a week after settling the supplies. He told them to start preparing as well, especially pointing at Zack to remind him to properly break up with his girlfriend. Zack's father and Diana were surprised to hear that. Diana added that she needed to say goodbye to her neighbors and the friends who had taken care of her. Her father said he had nothing to prepare except perhaps a small chat with his drinking buddies. Diana commented that those drinking buddies were the craftsmen who would be traveling with them, and he was just using it as an excuse. While the three talked, Masaru reflected that after negotiating with the king and shopping at the castle, he had obtained many useful items. More importantly, he had secured manpower: 6 blacksmiths, 2 leather workers, 8 carpenters, 4 tailors, 4 cooks, and 3 companions he trusted. As they continued talking, Zack's father told Zack to join him in cutting the wood and asked whether he still remembered how to use the tools. Zack agreed, wondering why his father had forgotten how much he used to help him. After finishing everything, Masaru went to the king to say he was leaving. The king said it was sooner than expected. Masaru replied that his purpose had been to negotiate and purchase supplies, and he would return if anything came up. The king said he would miss the many complaints from the castle town, all caused by Masaru's excessive shopping. He added that he was relieved Masaru hadn't suddenly invited a god again like he had when he first arrived. Masaru felt the king still hadn't gotten over that incident. The king then mentioned hearing that Masaru had been busy lately building a blacksmith shop and an armory to sell to the merchant guild. Masaru realized the king had received reports. The king said the store was described as the best in the capital, filled with shovels and displays no one had ever seen before. Masaru smirked, saying it seemed the king had seen right through him and had helped him greatly during his stay. He added that it was his way of giving something back, as a parting gift. Masaru believed the shop he had built was unlike anything the world had seen before. It was a 3-story stone building, and customers would see carefully designed shelves as soon as they entered, arranged to make the products easy to view. High-end items were displayed on the wall behind the counter. He said the shop's best feature was its anti-theft system. The employee only needed to pull a lever, and an iron cage would drop in front of the entrance and counter. The king asked if Masaru was calling that a parting gift. Masaru said he was, and explained that once the store opened, people in the trade would immediately notice the innovation and difference. With advancements in commerce, civilization itself would progress. He believed it would be a significant step forward in development. The king commented that, in his opinion, Masaru had been using his high status and skills to solve everything himself. He added that if manpower was available, Masaru should rely on it. Since Masaru had begun recruiting craftsmen in the capital, the king guessed he had already realized the value of that resource. If Masaru could not delegate, it meant he was still inexperienced, so as a trading partner and representative of his city, he should keep that in mind. Masaru felt the king had struck precisely at the core of the problem he faced while building, that there was only so much they could do when he was absent. It was like how they could never run the home center alone. They needed manpower to build a city for everyone. Masaru thanked the king, promising to keep those words in mind and continue to devote himself. The king smirked, asking why Masaru was thanking him when he had only been talking to himself. Masaru then said the king could send people to the city for magic and technology exchange, but hoped they would choose individuals without prejudice against beastmen. Suddenly, Masaru added that they should be spirited and strong people who wouldn't break easily. The king, surprised, agreed, and pointed out that Masaru babbled endlessly whenever making a request. He lifted a hand to say goodbye and said he looked forward to seeing the beautiful city Masaru was creating. Masaru shook his hand and said they should skip business next time and drink together, adding that he would call Alstacia and the others as well. The king, startled, begged him not to, reminding him that gods were not something Masaru could casually summon. After that, Masaru headed toward the capital gates, where Zack remarked that Masaru had been busy. Masaru said he had been talking with the king for a while. Zack reported that everything had already been loaded and that a group of people would be traveling with them. Just then, someone commented that he had never seen such a fun and lively group before, saying it was nothing like their usual caravans. The girl next to him warned him not to get carried away since they had only just received permission to travel with them. Masaru noticed that the companions had increased. Among them were 8 human and elf adventurers who wished to retire and settle in the city. They were cheerful, friendly, and a little carefree, but would play essential roles in security. A man called out to Masaru, asking if he planned to give them a strong speech too. As the others grew excited, Masaru couldn't hold back. He climbed onto a caravan and thanked everyone for accepting his invitation to settle in the new city. He said that with their skills and knowledge, They would not only help build the city but also lay a new foundation for exchange, for themselves and for the friends waiting for them at their new home. Everyone was prepared, and Masaru promised them that although the days ahead might be busy and difficult, they would also be filled with fun and joy, so they should face everything together. He then said his farewells to the capital, and they all departed for their new home. Many people had gathered to see them off. A few days had passed since their departure, and they kept talking about the things they had brought, the places they visited, and the supplies they had. Someone commented that the wild boar they had eaten the previous day had been delicious. Masaru felt that everyone seemed to be in high spirits. Zack then called out to Masaru, wondering whether he wasn't tired from running. Masaru denied it and asked why. Zack questioned how that could be possible and pointed out that Masaru had been running like that for an entire day. Masaru explained that his body became stiff if he sat in the carriage for too long and that they needed to loosen up during breaks. Zack said he didn't think what Masaru was doing was the same, and that Fried had already told him about it. Yet Masaru's stamina was still unbelievable. Masaru then remarked that Zack had been spending time with the elf and her friends, asking if he had finally experienced something new. Zack replied that he only wanted to ask her about the lifestyle of elves, and that Masaru would immediately notice if he ever had such an encounter, something Masaru himself would never understand. Inside the caravan, a girl asked Zack if she wasn't good enough, and Zack was startled, saying that wasn't what he meant. A man then called out to Masaru, telling him that he could see the river Masaru had mentioned at noon. Masaru agreed, saying the sun was about to set, so it was perfect timing, and they decided to set up camp near the riverbed for the day. As they were setting up the camps, a man asked Masaru when they would arrive. Masaru checked the map and explained that their current location was where the river and the road intersected, and that they were already halfway to the Beastman city. He added that they were on schedule, so there was nothing to worry about, and estimated that it would take only a few more days. While an elf lady was watching him, Masaru wondered what was wrong. The one-eyed man commented that the dimensional storage skill had already surprised them, but seeing that Masaru also had a map skill, and knowing he possessed multiple skills, was astonishing when witnessed in person. The elf lady said that despite living for so long, it was her first time seeing something like that. Masaru recalled that the rabbit folk people had also been surprised by it. The one-eyed man remarked that someone like Masaru had the caliber to build a city, and considering the conflict between humans and beastmen, it was surprising that Masaru was so well-liked among them. Masaru replied that the beastmen were very kind people, and that they were the ones who had saved him when he had collapsed. The one-eyed man said that they were now looking forward to reaching the city even more. The elf remarked that he couldn't wait to get there. Masaru told everyone to enjoy a good meal again and prepare for the next day's journey. The man then called out to the boys, saying he would decide the patrols for the day. Masaru went around asking whether they had enough ingredients for the meal. A man replied that they still had some meat left from noon and would check what was possible, adding that they wanted to stock up a bit more. He asked if they could gather some wild birds, saying he wanted to compare their taste with normal meat, and if that wasn't possible, collecting some wild grasses would also be fine. Masaru said it would be all right, since their expert hunter would take care of it. The expert hunter, the elf lady, went out to hunt birds and eventually returned with enough. Masaru was amazed again by her bold technique. No matter how many times he witnessed it, it always left him speechless. Zack said he didn't understand the difference between their bows and hers. The elf told Zack that his aim wasn't bad at all and that he had a good sense for targeting, but he looked at the targets too many times. She said that as long as he kept the bird's traits and flying patterns in mind, he would be able to hit them without difficulty. Zack wondered what she meant, questioning why they needed to understand the birds they were planning to hunt. The elf explained that the bird they were dealing with was a thief bird, an annoying creature known for stealing the belongings of travelers and adventurers. She added that one had even stolen her water pouch in the past, and that the birds stole purely for fun, dropping whatever they took before repeating the behavior. Masaru asked her what those birds tasted like. She said they were extremely delicious. As soon as Masaru heard that, he urged everyone to hunt more of those troublesome birds. Zack approached the elf, admitting he would have been more confident if the targets were wild boars, but this wasn't his area of expertise. The elf told him he had a good sense, and that giving up so early would be a waste. To help him, she offered the idea of trying her own bow, explaining that, although it was tricky to use, it could help him shoot the bird before it started moving. Masaru had already warned Zack to be careful, saying the bow was quite dangerous. The elf turned to Masaru, wondering how he knew so much about it. Masaru, shocked, explained that he had crafted a bow from the same materials before and could take it out if she was interested. In a hurry, she asked him to show it so she could check whether it was truly made of the same materials, saying the tension felt impossible. Masaru said that the bow was reinforced with mithril and that he had crafted it to match his own strength. She called it a lie, asking if he was claiming he could actually pull it. and insisted he demonstrated, thinking he was bluffing and had simply tightened the strings too much. Masaru grew uneasy, wondering if he had stepped on a landmine again. He had learned that discussing bows with elves never went well for him. He added that once he drew it, he would aim at a tree in the distance. The elf still believed he was making a fool of her, but Masaru insisted he wasn't, mentioning that he had unpleasant memories related to this bow and hoped nothing outrageous would happen again, like accidentally hitting a bear, for example. The elf casually added that this would only add another ingredient to their list, so he should hurry. Masaru took his stance, drew the bowstring, and the elf was shocked to see that he really could pull it. Masaru released the shot toward the tree, and the elf realized the arrow had pierced straight through multiple trees. Suddenly, a loud scream echoed in the distance. Masaru immediately grew worried, realizing he must have hit something again, and wondered if it was a human. The elf rushed off, calling him an idiot, saying the scream had come from another direction. When they arrived, they saw a group of humans being attacked by a pack of wolves on the plains. The group tried to flee, but a woman fell, and the wolves moved in to attack her. Zack said the timing was terrible, and the elf admitted her arrow wouldn't reach in time. Masaru ran ahead with a log, striking the wolves to save the woman and telling her to get away. Zack questioned how much leg strength Masaru even had, and the elf couldn't believe he had actually reached her in time. The rescued people wondered who he was. Masaru, still running with them, told them there was no time to talk and they needed to escape. When the wolves attacked him again, Masaru struck them, noticing that the resistance felt like cutting through stone. He quickly realized he wasn't imagining it. He really was cutting into something hard. The elf shouted that he needed to get back, explaining that these were not real wolves but golems. She fired arrows at them, but they kept advancing. Masaru knew arrows and swords were ineffective against such creatures. Suddenly, a woman appeared beside him and offered her help, telling Masaru to look for an opening to retreat. Masaru asked if she was crazy, pointing out that their weapons weren't working. She insisted he listen and get out, introducing herself as a knight who could not afford to show her back to the enemy. She rushed forward to strike, but Masaru stopped her, saying restraining them from behind seemed to work better. More golem wolves attacked from behind, and when they collided with Masaru, the knight apologized, thinking everything was her fault. She realized the wolves were clinging to him, and Masaru, in pain, told them not to bite his neck. Deepak and the elf looked on, completely confused by what was happening. Masaru told the knight that he could handle the wolves alone, and asked her to go back to her companions. Once she agreed, he glared at the wolves with tears in his eyes, furious that they had dared to damage his synthetic fiber clothing, something that didn't even exist in this world and was incredibly precious. He spun around, throwing the wolves into the air, warning that he would make them regret it. He then took out the same weapon he had used to demolish the house in the capital and attacked the wolves relentlessly, reducing them to pieces. He felt a little better now, though his clothes had been torn apart, and since he had brought a few tailors from the capital, he thought it was time to put them to work on repairs. Once everything settled down, Masaru thanked God that there had been no casualties. Zack agreed, saying the person who should have suffered the most injuries was instead full of energy, and added that Masaru had been quite impressive. He also said he needed to work on his own combat skills. Masaru himself was surprised. After regaining his mobility, he had used all his magic power on strengthening magic. It hadn't been bad, but when the wolf bit him, he had already recovered 1/3 of his magic power, and because of that, he had managed to break through the situation by strengthening his entire body. He finally realized that this was what people referred to as spirit class magic recovery. He then headed to the tent where the two elves from earlier were resting, finding the elf from his group standing outside. Masaru asked her if the two were still inside. She nodded, explaining that the person inside was the leader of the group Masaru had rescued. Masaru asked why. She was standing guard, and she said she had simply come to check on members of her own race. Masaru apologized for disturbing them, but they told him to come in. Those two introduced themselves as dark elves, and Masaru thanked them for their help. The elf in his group pointed out that the newcomers were of the same race as her. When she and the other dark elf exchanged glances, the elf from Masaru's side asked why the other was looking at her like that, and the other asked the same in return. Masaru said they should get along and told them not to worry. His elf wondered what he meant by that and whether he was comparing them. Masaru apologized and suggested they talk instead, adding that he was truly glad they were safe and nearby. He then asked why they were being accompanied by the golems and, if possible, whether they could share some details about the incident. When they remained silent for a moment, he told them that if it was something they didn't want to share, he wouldn't force them. One of them eventually said that it might seem shameless to the other survivors, but they were currently having great difficulty finding a place to settle down. She asked whether, if it was acceptable, Masaru's group could take both of them in. Without hesitation, Masaru agreed, and the two dark elves said they understood that their request might put him in a difficult position. but because of their circumstances, they truly had nowhere else to go. Masaru called Zack, saying he needed help preparing the carriage. The lady added that the two of them might be exhausted from traveling and still had no place to settle. Masaru and Zack discussed possible plans for the journey. The lady seemed surprised and wondered aloud if they were truly fine with taking the Dark Elves in. Masaru confirmed it, saying he had already made his stance clear. The elf in Masaru's group commented that she couldn't tell whether the newcomers were unlucky or fortunate, but said they would at least get used to Masaru's usual chaos soon enough. Masaru reminded everyone that they weren't just any group. They were a band of returnees making their way back home. They eventually reached the Beastman city. May greeted Masaru with a hug, welcoming him back, and he asked how she had been. The other rabid fox and Adelina also welcomed him, saying he was as unpredictable as always. Masaru was relieved to see that Adelina was doing well and asked where the chief was. Adelina replied that the chief was currently working in the housing area and would arrive soon. She was surprised to see that Masaru had brought many people again and learned that they were craftsmen and new companions who would help build the city. Masaru added that they had met a group of dark elves on the way and that those elves would be staying there temporarily. Adelina agreed and said she would prepare a place for everyone. When the dark elves came down from the carriage, they were astonished to see that an actual city existed deep within the mountains. One of them expressed admiration upon learning that the Beastman city had been built through cooperation between humans and beastmen. The other remarked that Masaru was probably involved in something behind the scenes again, then pointed ahead, telling her companion to look at the welcoming, enthusiastic smiles, faces she recognized all too well. They said it was the look of trust, something they had often seen in the past and were very familiar with. Masaru approached the two dark elves and asked them to gather with the others. He told them that the chief planned to hold a welcome party for them, as well as for their leader and her aide. He then pointed out that they still hadn't introduced themselves. The first elf introduced herself as Emeralda, and the second as Arena. Masaru introduced himself in return and encouraged them to treat the place as their own. Later that night, everyone shared a meal together, and Alpha and Beta also went to meet the chief. Masaru noticed that Saphira was present with a group of children. She welcomed him and apologized for being late, explaining that the children simply wouldn't give her a break. The kids thanked her for playing with them and said they would see her the next day. Masaru wondered aloud if she had completely settled into her role as a teacher. She said she was happy he thought so. Masaru then remarked that she seemed to have taught magic to all the children as promised. Saphira agreed, saying that gods always kept their word, and that it was rare for her to directly involve herself in the lives of people in the lower world. She admitted she hadn't expected it to be so enjoyable, especially since she got to teach magic, something she excelled at. She said she was grateful to Masaru for giving her such a delightful opportunity, which was why it saddened her that she now had to leave. Masaru asked what she meant. She explained that she had nothing left to teach, and since Masaru had returned, her role as a teacher had come to an end. He was shocked and questioned how a god of magic could possibly run out of things to teach. Saphira reminded him of the matter of the crabs, and said that, according to the code of the gods, she had to avoid excessive meddling. Masaru had asked her to teach magic to the citizens on his behalf, which meant she could only teach magic he himself was capable of using. She said she had already finished teaching everyone the basics of magic perception, and her work was now complete. The children invited her to eat with them, leaving Masaru speechless. Saphira said she had enjoyed the experience and had already fulfilled the promise she made. She added that their contract was ending, and that if Masaru needed her for anything else, he could simply send her a message through the status screen. Masaru said that if that was the case, then starting the next day, he wanted exclusive one-on-one magic lessons, since he needed to give instructions to the craftsmen. He asked her to teach him for about an hour each day. She was shocked and questioned what he was thinking, saying it would go against the rules. Masaru replied that it would be fine as long as he had the aptitude. She only needed to teach him magic he hadn't realized he could use yet. Since he was a resident of the town, he believed he qualified for her instruction. If he managed to learn new spells, she could reopen classes and teach them to everyone else. Besides, their contract never had a deadline to begin with. She agreed, though hesitantly, and asked why he wasn't already overwhelmed with building the city alongside the craftsmen he recruited. She wondered why he would spend his time with her. Masaru answered simply that it was fun. She agreed to cooperate, and Masaru, surprised, asked if he had said something strange. She denied it, but said she had realized something. She finally understood why her sister frequently watched or descended to the lower world. She said it was a good realization, and that she would explain it to him later. For now, they would begin lessons the next day, and she told him to be prepared. Masaru agreed, saying he would be in her care. But the next morning when he arrived for class, he quickly grew bored, complaining that he couldn't believe she had summoned him as soon as the sun rose. She acted strict, reminding him that he was the one who had asked for lessons. so he had no right to complain. Saphira asked whether Masaru had already learned the general idea of magic from Victinius. Masaru said he had, explaining that it was about imagination. Saphira accepted his answer and said she would skip the explanation on that as well as the strengthening theory. She then told him that the first step was learning how to release the magic inside one's body. Masaru picked up a tea branch, saying he already knew how, and immediately unleashed his power. Saphira told him he had skipped a basic step and instructed him, as his teacher, to release his magic into the air first, since the air offered less resistance than a physical object. Masaru understood and said he would release all of his magic power at once. As he prepared to do so, Saphira was shocked to see his magic rising vertically, an ability belonging to reincarnated individuals. Masaru asked if that meant he was doing well, and decided to try something else while he was at it. Since he could now use magic efficiently, he attempted wind magic. Saphira tried to stop him, warning that using wind magic with such an overwhelming amount of magical power would be dangerous. A massive tornado formed from Masaru's spell, leaving everyone stunned. For the next 7 days, Saphira continued lecturing him. After that period, when Masaru arrived for training, he found that Saphira wasn't there. It felt strange to him, since it was hard to imagine such a diligent goddess being late, unlike a certain other goddess he knew. That day was supposed to be compressed power training, and he had been looking forward to it. Just then, a portal opened, and Victinius stepped through. She said Saphira had asked her to come and wondered if Masaru could stop babbling so much. Otherwise, she believed he deserved punishment. Masaru expressed his shock, saying it had been a long time since they last met. Victinius said that she had received a call from Saphira asking her to help Masaru with his magic studies for the day. And since the request came from her adorable little sister, she would spare no effort and no mercy in educating him. She warned him to be prepared. Masaru grew uneasy at the sight of her wicked smile and realized this must have been why Saphira had been so focused on her status screen earlier. Victinius commented that she was glad Masaru and Saphira were getting along so well. Masaru told her to stop slacking off and get serious. She replied that she didn't want to hear such things from him. He cut her off, telling her to stop grumbling and begin the magic compression training. Masaru wondered why Victinius had come instead of Saphira, and thought she seemed to be in a very bad mood. He turned toward her and told her to calm down, or she would end up with more wrinkles. She shouted that she was completely calm. Masaru accepted her claim and said that was exactly why she kept telling him to get serious and start the compression training. She warned him that if he failed to master the technique, the consequences would be even worse than the tornado he created during the previous day's training. Masaru said he only needed to imagine it the same way air was compressed. He remembered that when he had worked at a home center, a compressed gas cylinder had once fallen off a truck and damaged its cap. He had seen the air gush out of the hole and watched the cylinder shoot straight into a wall like a missile. Victinius told him to gather his magic and release it once more. Masaru agreed and said he would give it another try.